The reading was supposed to fall. That was the whole of it, the single fact around which the assay was built, the fact printed at the top of every ledger slate in the Stilling House. Administer the hush, and the loud mind goes quiet. The lines on the cognition board drop. The subject softens. Within a measured span, the storm of a clamor world brain smooths to the flat, gentle hum of a stilled thing, and the assay is complete. Sale watched the reading climb. She watched it the way one watches water run uphill. Not with alarm, not yet, because alarm would have required believing her own instrument, and she did not yet believe it. She reached across the console and pressed her 3 longest fingers to the calibration seal, resetting the trace to baseline. The line dropped to 0. Then it began, immediately and without hesitation, to climb again. "Chief Assay," she said. Thren Vosk did not turn. He stood at the head of the assay cradle with his hands folded into the sleeves of his ledger robe, his throat light held at the low, even amber of a physician who has performed a procedure so many thousands of times that it has become a kind of breathing. On the cradle before him, restrained at 7 points, lay the specimen, a clamor world native, male by their crude two-form biology, young in the count of his own short-lived species. The hush had gone into him 400 beats ago through the intake port at the base of his skull, and by every precedent in the ledger of stilled worlds, he should by now have been drifting down into the soft, obedient nothing from which no loud mind had ever returned. "The reading," Vosk said, still not turning, "is falling." "The reading is climbing, Chief Assay." Now he turned. He was old even for a Vharl, and age in their kind showed as a translucence, a thinning of the skin until the pale architecture beneath came faintly through, so that Vosk's face in the assay light looked like a lamp with the shade half gone. He crossed to her console with the unhurried economy of authority and looked at the trace, and Sale watched his throat light, because she had learned young that a Vharl's mouth told you what they wished you to know, and their throat light told you the rest. Vosk's held amber. Then it did not. For the briefest flicker, a flicker he would have denied, a flicker he perhaps did not himself feel, it stuttered toward white. "Recalibrate," he said. "I have 3 times." "Recalibrate a 4th." She did. The line dropped to 0. It climbed. It climbed past the baseline of a waking loud mind, past the shaded band the ledger marked as agitation, past the red seal at the top of the board that Sale had been taught represented a theoretical ceiling, a number the instrument could display but which no living cognition had ever been recorded to reach, because to reach it a mind would have to be doing more thinking, faster, more of it at once, than the assay could parse. The line touched the seal. And then, because the instrument had no room left to draw, it simply pressed flat against the top of the display and stayed there, quivering, like a thing straining at the roof of the world. Across the ward, at his own console, the 3rd assay, a nervous junior named Alo who had come up through the same ledger school as Sale, made a sound in his throat that was not a word. "Explain the fault," Vosk said to the room. No one explained the fault, because there was no fault. Sale had built her career on instruments. She trusted them the way she did not trust faces. The instrument was reading true. The loud mind on the cradle was not shutting down. It was doing the opposite of shutting down. It was accelerating, and it had been accelerating from the moment the hush touched it, as though the agent that had stilled 1,000 worlds had been poured into this one skull not as a drug but as fuel. "Subject," Vosk said, moving to stand over the cradle. His voice took on the flattened register the assayers used with specimens, the register that expected no reply. "State your designation." And the specimen, the young clamor world male, restrained at 7 points, 400 beats into a dose that should have unmade him, opened his eyes, and looked up at the translucent old physician leaning over him, and spoke in slow, careful, deliberately shaped Vharl trade cant, which he should not have known, which he could not have known, which no specimen had ever spoken in the history of the Stilling House. "You're doing it wrong," he said. His name was Cole Renner. He was 24 Earth years old, which the ledger recorded as roughly 4/5 of a V. Harl's first maturity, and which Cole himself, in the days that followed, would describe to Sale as young enough to still think I was going to live forever, up until about a week ago. He had been a deck analyst aboard a human survey cutter named Cormorant, a small, ugly, patient ship whose job was to drift at the frayed edges of charted space and listen. The V. Harl interdiction sloop that took the Cormorant had disabled her cleanly, professionally, without loss of life, because the V. Harl did not kill Loud World natives if it could be helped. Killing was disorder. Killing left a body, a record, a grieving world that remembered. The V. Harl preferred the hush. A stilled native left nothing behind but a quiet one, and quiet ones did not grieve, and worlds that received their people back soft and smiling and empty rarely understood, for a generation or more, that anything had been taken at all. Sale knew all of this because she had helped take him. She had been aboard the sloop. She had run the intake assay on the Cormorant's crew of 9 as they came through the lock, stunned and blinking, and she had marked 7 of them for the deep holds in 2 of them, the 2 whose cognition traces spiked highest, the 2 loudest of a loud crew, for the stilling house, because the ledger taught that you stilled the loud ones first. Cole Renner had been the loudest reading she had ever logged off a fresh intake. She had noted it as an anomaly. She had not thought then that it was a warning. She thought so now. "You're doing it wrong," he had said, and Vosk had straightened over the cradle very slowly, and the ward had gone so still that Sale could hear the intake port hiss against the young man's skull. "The subject is speaking cant," Alo said, unnecessarily, in the thin voice of someone narrating a thing so he does not have to feel it. "The subject," Vosk said, "is exhibiting terminal agitation. It is common. Loud minds at the threshold of stilling sometimes produce a final surge, a flare before the dark. It mimics coherence. It is not coherence." He said this to the room, and the room wanted very badly to believe him, and Sale watched his throat light and saw that it wanted to believe him too. "Increase the dose." "Chief Assur." "Increase the dose, Assur Sale." She increased the dose. She would think about that later, the ease of it, the way her fingers had known the sequence before her mind had agreed to it, the way a lifetime inside a hierarchy makes your hands loyal to it even after your judgment has begun, quietly, to defect. She keyed the second measure of the hush into the intake line. She watched it go down the tube. She watched it reach the young man on the cradle. And she watched the line on her board, which had been pressed flat and quivering against the roof of the world, do the one thing she would not have believed a line could do. It found more room. The instrument which had no room left gave it room. The display flickered, rescaled itself, dropped the whole trace to a quarter height to make space at the top, and the line leapt up into the space it had made and pressed against the new ceiling and quivered there, and Sale understood, with a cold that started at the base of her skull and ran down through every joint of her long body, that the number was not the point. The number would never be the point. You could give the instrument 1,000 new ceilings, and the loud mind would climb to every one of them, because the loud mind was not straining against a limit. The loud mind had no limit. It was simply, for the first time in its short life, unshuttered, every window thrown open at once, and what poured through was not noise, the way it would have been noise in a V. Harl, the way it was designed to be terminal, unbearable noise in any properly ordered brain. In this brain it was not noise, in this brain it was signal. "He's reorganizing," Sale said. "That is not a recognized clinical state. It's not recognized because it's never happened." She heard her own voice do something it was not supposed to do in the presence of a Chief Assur. It disagreed. "The trace isn't chaotic, Chief Assur. Chaos is what stilling produces on the way down. The loud pattern breaks up, decoheres, goes to static, goes flat. This is the opposite. This is a pattern getting more ordered. He's taking the flood and he's sorting it. He's building something out of it." On the cradle, Cole Renner turned his head, as far as the 7-point restraint allowed, which was not far, and looked at Sale. It was the first time a specimen had ever looked at her as though she, and not he, were the subject of an assay. "She's right," he said, in his slow, careful cant. Then, after a moment, in the tone of a man reading a label he found mildly interesting, "You built a machine to drown a fish." Viharial physiology, Sale had been taught in her first year, was the most refined instrument in the known volume of space, and the refinement was this: quiet. The viharial brain was a serial instrument. It ran one bright, clean line of thought at a time, in order without spillage, and it was very good at that line, better than any loud world mind at holding a single thread pure and unbroken across enormous stretches of reasoning. It was the reason the viharial had built the ledger, and the assay, and the interdiction fleet, and the whole gentle machinery of the quiet. They had gone out into the volume expecting to find other quiet minds, and had found instead a galaxy full of noise, worlds of screaming, spilling, parallel, chaotic cognition, minds that thought 6 things at once and half of them wrong, minds that could not hold a clean line for the length of a breath. Loud worlds, clamor worlds. And the viharial had recoiled from them the way a physician recoils from an open wound, and had reached out of that recoil for a cure. The hush was the cure. It did not kill, it quieted. It reached into a loud mind and it severed the spillage, closed the extra windows, forced the screaming parallel thing down into a single clean serial line, and a loud mind which had never been built to run on one line, which needed all its windows open the way a body needs all its lungs, could not survive on one line. It did not die. It simply went still. It became, at last, quiet. And the viharial, who could imagine no greater kindness than quiet, believed to the roots of their translucent bones that they were performing an act of mercy. Sale had believed it too. That was the thing she would carry afterward, the splinter that would not work its way out. She had believed it. She had stilled loud minds for 11 years and had gone home to her sleep hollow each cycle, believing she was a healer. She had never asked what a loud world was for. Cole Renner asked it for her, on the second day, strapped to the cradle with 2 full measures of the hush in him, and a third being prepared. His cognition trace pressed flat against a ceiling the instrument had rescaled 4 times. "You think the noise is a defect," he said. His cant had improved overnight, not learned overnight, Sale understood now, but assembled overnight, reverse-built from the 1100 words he'd heard the Asyers speak around him, back-solved into a grammar he now spoke more cleanly than Allo did. "You think a mind that thinks 6 things at once is a broken mind. You keep trying to fix us down to one thing, one clean line." He smiled. Sale did not yet know what a human smile meant. She would learn to fear the small ones. "Where I'm from, the thing that thinks one thing at a time is the thing that gets eaten." "Do not converse with it," Vosk said, without looking up from the 3rd measure. "You want to know why the noise doesn't kill me," Cole went on to Sale, only to Sale, as though the chief Asyer were a piece of the room's furniture. "It's because I grew up drowning. Everybody on my world grows up drowning. 10,000 things coming at you at once, all the time, most of them lying, and you learn before you can walk to hold all of them open and sort the true from the false on the fly. Because the one time you close a window is the time the thing you closed it on kills you." He tilted his head, the small movement the restraint allowed. "You poured a whole ocean into me, but I'm not a viharial. I don't drown in oceans. I'm made of them." Vosk turned. His throat light was amber, held amber, forced amber. "3rd measure," he said. Sale's fingers found the sequence. She hesitated. It was half a beat. Less. But Vosk saw it, because Vosk had spent 400 years reading the small defections of junior Asyers, and his eyes, pale, lidless, dilating now to the wide black of a viharial under strain, moved from her hand to her face, and his throat light spoke the thing his mouth would not, and what it spoke, for one flicker, before he clamped it back down to amber, was fear. "The dose, Asyer," he said. She gave the 3rd measure. And the young man on the cradle, who had grown up drowning, took the third ocean the way the first two had been taken. Not with a fight, not with a scream, but with the slow, terrible, deepening calm of a thing settling into the exact element it was built for, and closed his eyes, and was quiet for a long moment, and then said without opening them, in flawless vHaral trade cant, "There are 41 of you on this station. There were 43 when I came aboard. 2 of you have gone off rotation in the last day. 1 is in a med hollow on the second ring with a pressure fault in her left breathing sac. I heard the alarm cadence through the deck. The other one I don't know about yet." He opened his eyes. "Give me another day and I'll know about that one too." The ward was silent. Sale looked at the trace. It was climbing. "You keep giving me more," Cole Renner said, and his voice was gentle, almost grateful, the voice of a man being handed tools. "Please don't stop." The Meridian was an assay station of the 9th grade, which meant it was old, respected, and far from anything. It hung in slow orbit around a pale gas giant the ledger called Sol, a world so wide and so cold and so uniformly gray that from the station's outer galleries it looked less like a planet than like a wall, a great flat backdrop of moving cloud against which the Meridian floated like a splinter of bone. 4 rings, stacked, turning. The stilling house occupied the inner 2. 41 vHaral crewed it, or 43 before the intake. Assiers, ledger keepers, a handful of the serval caste who tended the deep holds where the stilled ones and the soon-to-be stilled ones waited in their soft gray rows. It was, by the standards of the quiet, a peaceful place. Nothing loud had ever happened here that had not been made to stop being loud within a day. Cole Renner had been aboard for 6. On the 3rd day, Vosk sealed the ward. He did it quietly, the way he did everything, but Sale understood the shape of it. He restricted the assay logs to his own ledger seal. He sent Alo and the 2 other junior Assiers off the rotation, and replaced them with himself and Sale alone, so that the number of vHaral who had heard the specimen speak cant, who had watched the trace climb, was as small as he could make it. And he began, methodically, the way an old physician confronted with an impossible reading always begins, to assume that the impossibility was a fault in the world and not in his understanding of it. "The intake port is contaminated," he told Sale on the 3rd morning before Cole was awake. "The dose is not reaching the cortical seat. It is pooling. What we are reading is not the subject's cognition but a resonance artifact, the instrument reading its own delivery line." "The trace is coherent, Chief Assier." "Artifacts aren't coherent." "Replace the port, draw fresh intake." She replaced the port. She drew a fresh intake, clean, seated true, verified at 3 points. She administered the 4th measure of the hush directly to the cortical seat with no possibility of pooling, no resonance, no artifact. And the trace, freed of even the small resistance the old port had offered, climbed faster. Cole woke while she was still watching it climb. "4th one," he said. His voice was rougher now, 6 days of restraint and intake, and the particular exhaustion of a body kept alive on tubes had worn it down to a low-level rasp. But the words came out clean and ordered, and Sale had begun to notice that he never reached for a word. He simply had it. Where an ordinary speaker, even a native, groped and hedged and circled, Cole spoke as if every sentence were already finished before he began it and he were merely reading it off. "You changed the port. Good instinct. Wrong problem. The dose was always reaching me. That was never the issue." "Do not converse with it," Vosk said. "You keep saying that," Cole said, "and she keeps doing it because she's the only one on this station whose instruments are more honest than her hierarchy." He turned his head toward Sale. His eyes were a loud world brown, and there was nothing loud in them at all. They were the calmest eyes she had ever been looked at by. "You want to know what I'm doing with it? The dose. You've been wanting to ask for 3 days and you won't because he's standing there." He didn't glance at Vosk. "I'll tell you anyway. You gave me a mind that couldn't keep up with itself. That's what your people can't imagine, isn't it? A mind that outruns its own processing, that generates more than it can hold. To you that's the definition of drowning. Well, a small movement of the mouth. I've been drowning my whole life. So a long time ago my kind of mind learned a trick. When you can't hold everything, you stop trying to hold it. You start predicting it instead. You build a little model of the world inside your head and you run it faster than the world runs, and you check the model against what actually comes in, and every time it's wrong you fix it and the model gets better. The mouth again. Your hush didn't drown me. It gave me more to build the model out of. 4 days ago I could predict the next thing one of you would say. Now I can predict the next 3. Keep dosing me and I'll predict the day. Sale looked at Vosk. Vosk's throat light was amber. He was very good. He had held it amber for 3 days. But there is a thing that happens to a V-Harl under sustained strain, a thing no discipline fully hides, and it was happening to Vosk now. The fine tremor in the longest fingers, the almost invisible flutter at the edges of the throat patch, the dilation that no amount of will can close. Cole Renner had been reading it for 3 days. He read it now, and something crossed his tired face that was not triumph. Triumph would have been loud, and nothing about him was loud but recognition, the plain, flat recognition of a man confirming a number he already had. "You're afraid of me," Cole said, not a taunt, an observation offered almost kindly. "Not the way a soldier's afraid. You're a doctor. You're afraid the way a doctor's afraid when the thing on the table starts sitting up. You spent your whole life believing you were curing us, and now you're standing over a clamor world native who's getting smarter every time you try to switch him off, and somewhere behind that amber you're starting to do the arithmetic on what that means about all the other worlds you've switched off." He let that sit. "It means you were never curing anything. It means you found the one kind of mind in the galaxy that eats your medicine and asks for more. And you've been walking past us in the deep holds for 1,000 years calling it mercy." "Sedate it," Vosk said. "Chief Assier, the hush is the sedative, and it isn't." "The physical body," Vosk said, and his voice had gone very flat and very careful, the voice of a man reading his own last clean line off the top of a page. "Sedate the physical body, not the mind. The mind we can no longer reach, but the body still obeys the older agents. Put it under. If it cannot speak, it cannot reason at us. If it cannot sense, it has nothing to build its model from. Take away its inputs and the model starves." He turned to the intake console. "We do not need to still the mind. We need only to blind it." And for the first time in 3 days, Sale saw Cole Renner go still in a way that was not calm. They put him under. It was, Sale told herself, a mercy in its own right. 6 days of restraint and forced waking are their own kind of torment, and the deep sedation the V-Harl used on the serval cast for surgery was clean and painless and dreamless, or so the ledger held. They ran the older agent into him, the one that acted on the body and not the mind, the one that had reliably switched off 10,000 loud bodies without ever needing to touch the storms inside their skulls. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. The 7-point restraint went slack because there was no longer anything to restrain. The body of Cole Renner lay on the assay cradle, sedated to the floor, blind and deaf and dumb, cut off from every input the world could offer it. And the cognition trace kept climbing. Sale sat with it through the night rotation alone, because Vosk had gone to compose a transmission he would not let her read, and she watched the line of a mind that had been sealed inside a body that could no longer feel the world. There was nothing coming in. No sight, no sound, no touch, no voice to reason at, no faces to read, no instruments to hear through the deck. The model, Cole had said, starves without inputs. She had believed him. She had believed at least that he believed it. The line climbed. It climbed slower than before. She could see that, could measure it. The loss of inputs was real and it cost him, but it climbed. And after a while she understood, sitting alone in the sealed ward at the dead middle of the night rotation, what it was climbing on. He had said it himself and she had not listened. You build a model of the world inside your head and you run it faster than the world runs. He didn't need the world anymore. He had already taken enough of it in. 6 days of listening to the Assiers, reading their lights. hearing the station breathe through the deck, 6 days of a mind that recorded everything and discarded nothing. And now, blind and deaf on the cradle, he was doing the thing his kind had learned to do on a world where closing a window got you killed. He was running the model. He was living inside the little world he'd built, walking its corridors, testing its people, finishing every sentence anyone aboard the Meridian might ever say to him, and refining it in the dark, with nothing but itself to work on. You could not starve it by taking away the world. You had already given it the world. That was the assay. That was the mistake. You had spent 6 days feeding the model, and then you had locked it in a room with everything it had eaten. Sale did something then that she had never done in 11 years of service. She unsealed a channel that was not hers to unseal. Vosk's ledger seal was old and proud and easy, the seal of a V'harl who had never once imagined a junior would defy him, and she read the transmission he was composing to the overseer's office on the far side of the volume. It was short. It requested, in the flat language of the assay, an escalation of authority. It requested the presence of a reclamation overseer aboard the Meridian. And in the final line, beneath the request, in the small annotation field where an assay records the reason for an escalation, Vosk had written 4 words that Sale would remember to the end of her life. The specimen must not disembark. He surfaced on the 5th day. Not because the sedation failed, the V'harl agents did not fail, and the body of Cole Renner remained by every physical measure deeply under. He simply began from inside the sedation to speak. It should not have been possible. The agent shut down the pathways that moved the mouth, the tongue, the breath in service of speech. Sale was alone in the ward when it happened, on the 5th night rotation, and she heard the sound before she understood it, a low, effortful, malformed shaping of air, the sound of a man teaching a sedated body to do a thing it had been told it could not do. He was routing around the block. He had spent 2 days blind and deaf and dumb, building a model of his own nervous system out of the inside, and he had found the paths the agent had not thought to close, and he was using them. SL, he said. The name came out slurred, effortful, dragged up through a body that did not want to give it, but it was her name, Sale. She should have called Vosk. She did not call Vosk. You can hear me, she said in cant quietly, leaning close to the cradle. Little, the slurred voice said. Enough, listen, not much time hold this shape long costs, a long dragging breath. The one he sent for, the overseer, reclamation, you read it, not a question, he had known she would read it, he had, Sale understood with a fresh cold, counted on it. When reclamation comes they won't assay me, they'll erase the station, that's what reclamation is, not a doctor. Of the word cost him an eraser, chief scared enough to burn his own station to close the record. You, Allo. The servile ones in the holds, all of it, quiet, clean, no witnesses. The breath dragged again. You've stilled 1,000 worlds and never once been the thing on the cradle you're about to be. Sale sat very still. I'm not telling you to save me, the slurred voice said, and this was the moment, she would mark it always as the moment, when she stopped being an assay with a difficult specimen and became something else, a witness, the one who was there. I'll be fine. That's not the problem you have. Your problem is your 40 V'harl on a station your own chief has already decided to erase, and the only one aboard who's smart enough to get you out is the thing you've been trying to switch off for 5 days. The mouth, even slurred, even from the floor of a sedation, made the small shape she had learned to fear. So, you want to keep being the doctor, or you want to live? Sale did not answer him that night. She sat in the sealed ward until the slurred voice used up whatever it had been holding and slid back down into the true dark of the sedation, and the trace, which had spiked while he spoke, settled again into its slow, terrible climb. Then she went to her sleep hollow and did not sleep. She lay in the dark of the second ring, and did the thing the V'harl were supposed to be best at in all the volume. She held one clean line of thought, unbroken, from end to end. The line was this. For 11 years she had stilled loud minds and called it healing. She had never asked what a loud world was for, because the ledger did not ask, and she had been the ledger's instrument. And now a loud mind had told her in the flat voice of a man reading a label that she had been walking past the deep holds for 1,000 years calling murder mercy. She could reject that. She had the whole weight of the quiet on her side, the whole architecture of a civilization that had decided, long before she was decanted, that noise was a disease and the cure was kind. Or she could believe the instrument. The trace was the instrument. The trace said the loud mind was not drowning. The trace had said so for 5 days, in a voice that did not lie, that could not lie, that had no hierarchy to be loyal to. She had built her career on trusting instruments over faces. Vosk was a face. In the morning she went to the ward before the rotation, and she did not administer the 6th measure of the hush. She logged that she had. She falsified the ledger, a thing so far outside the possible that she had to invent, on the spot, the mechanism by which a VHARL could do it, because there was no procedure, because no assayer in 1,000 years had ever needed to lie to the ledger. And when Vosk came in and looked at the trace and saw it climbing, he assumed the 6th measure was feeding it, and he was satisfied, and Sale understood that she had crossed a line she could not uncross, and that she had crossed it not for the specimen, but because the specimen was right and she had spent 11 years being wrong. He surfaced, she told Cole when Vosk had gone. She kept the sedation running. She kept the trace on the board. To any eye watching the logs, the assay proceeded. In the night, through the block, he's coming, the overseer, reclamation. The transmission's away, it can't be recalled, it went before I read it. She leaned close to the cradle, to the sedated body and the roaring mind sealed inside it. You said you could get them out. The crew. If that's true, tell me how. And stop telling me you'll be fine. Because if reclamation erases this station, you will be as erased as anyone. The malformed voice, when it came, was steadier than the night before. He had practiced. 2 days sedated, and he had practiced holding the shape. First thing, he said, stop calling it a station, it's a machine. Machines have a logic, and a logic has a seam, and a seam is where you put the knife. A dragging breath. Second thing, I need the walk. The walk. Take me off the cradle, wake me up. Walk me through it, the rings, the holds, the docks, the systems, the people. You've been afraid to because the moment I'm awake and moving I'm dangerous. I understand, I am dangerous. The mouth. But I'm blind, SL. I've been building the whole station out of 6 days of sound through a deck and 1,100 words of your language and the tremor in an old man's fingers. It's a good model. It's a very good model, but it's a model. Show me the real thing for 1 hour and I stop guessing and start knowing. And knowing is the difference between a plan and a hope. If I wake you, Sale said, and Vosk finds you awake and off the cradle, then you'd better make sure Vosk is somewhere else. The slurred voice was patient, almost gentle. You're an assayer. You know his rotation better than he does. You've been reading his lights for 5 days the same way I have. When does he sleep? She told him when Vosk slept. Then that's when we walk, said the man on the cradle, and slid back down into the dark to save his strength. She woke him on the 6th night in the dead middle of the rotation, when the meridian's 4 rings turned through the shadow of Sol, and the great gray planet blotted out even the distant suns, and the station ran on its low, sleeping lights. Bringing a clamor world native up out of deep sedation was not a thing the ledger had a clean procedure for, because the ledger's procedures ran in one direction, down into the quiet. She improvised. She had watched him improvise for 6 days. She found she had learned the shape of it. She brought him up slow and unlocked the 7-point restraint with her own seal, and when he sat up on the cradle for the first time, a lean, worn, brown-eyed loud world native, unrestrained in the heart of a stilling house, every instinct of 11 years told her to run. He looked at her. He looked at the ward. He looked at it the way a man looks at a room he has walked 1,000 times in the dark and is now, for the first time, seeing lit. Bigger than I thought, he said quietly in clean cant, his real voice at last low and level. The ceiling's higher, I had it lower. Everything else is close. He swung his legs off the cradle and stood and swayed and steadied. A body 6 days on tubes does not walk easily, and put one hand flat against the cold wall of the ward as if greeting it. Show me. She showed him. She should not have been able to. A single junior assayer, walking an unrestrained specimen through a sealed stilling house in the dead of the rotation. It was a chain of impossibilities, each one a thing that had never been done because no one had ever needed to do it, and that was exactly why it worked. The Meridian had no defense against it. A machine built to still the loud has no procedure for the loud getting up and walking around, because in the whole history of the machine that had never once occurred. The corridors were empty. The seals answered her assayer's authority. The 2 serval-cast tenders on the night rotation were in the far ring, and Sale knew their pattern, and Cole, walking beside her with one hand trailing the wall, seemed to know it too, seemed to be checking it against something, murmuring under his breath in his own tongue, low numbers, a private arithmetic. "You count," she said. "Always." He didn't look at her. He was looking at everything else, drinking it, the real corridors replacing the modeled ones behind his eyes. Distances, angles, how long the light takes to cross a gallery so I know how big it really is. How the deck flexes when the ring turns so I know where the mass is. Where the air moves so I know where it comes in and where it goes out. He stopped at a junction and put his hand against a seam in the wall where 2 hull sections met and held it there and closed his eyes. There, that's a seam. Feel the cold coming through. That's the outer hull, 1 layer right there. Whoever built this station saved mass on the galleries because nobody was ever supposed to be standing in them who wasn't already stilled. He opened his eyes. Your architects had the same blind spot your doctors do. They built the whole place around the idea that anything dangerous would already be asleep. He walked her station in an hour, and by the end of the hour, he knew it better than she did. She took him to the edge of the deep holds because he asked, and would not tell her why until they were there. The holds were the oldest part of the Meridian, the inner ring, 4 long low galleries lined floor to ceiling with the soft gray cradles of the stilled, the finished work of the stilling house, worlds worth of loud minds brought down at last into the quiet, kept alive, kept peaceful, kept. Sale had walked the holds 1,000 times. She had never walked them beside someone who had not been raised to see them as a kindness. Cole stood at the mouth of the first gallery and looked down the long gray rows of them, the sleeping quieted ones, rank on rank on rank, and for the first time since the assay began the calm went out of his face. It did not become anger. She had half expected anger. The ledger warned that loud minds ran hot, that they broke into rage. He did not break into anything. What came into his face instead was worse than anger because it was quiet and it was exact and it did not go away. He counted the rows. She watched him count them. She watched the number reach whatever it reached and stop. "How many worlds?" he said. "I don't." "How many worlds, SL?" Still quiet, still level. "You keep a ledger of everything. How many worlds have you emptied into rooms like this?" She told him the number in the ledger. He was silent for a long time, standing at the mouth of the gallery of the stilled, and when he spoke again his voice had not risen at all, and that was the thing that would stay with her, the thing she would try and fail to describe to the ones who came after. That a mind expanding past every ceiling her instruments could draw, standing over the evidence of 1,000 murdered worlds, did not shout, did not weep, did not threaten. It simply set the number down beside the plan it was already building, and adjusted the plan to account for it, and said, in the flat voice of a man reading a label he had finally understood, "All right, then we don't just get your crew out." He turned from the holds. "We wake them up." The reclamation overseer arrived on the 8th day, and the Meridian changed shape around her the way a body changes shape around a fever. Her name was Iprith, and she was not an assayer. Sale understood that within moments of the docking, when the overseer came through the inner lock flanked by 2 of the security cast, squat, broad, armored V-Harl of a build Sale had seen perhaps 3 times in her life, bred for a purpose the quiet did not like to name, and the Asyers of the Meridian, who had spent their lives believing themselves the sharpest instruments of their civilization, drew back from her without deciding to. Iprith's throat light did not flicker. It did not hold amber either. It was simply off, dark, a throat patch that had been trained or altered or born to show nothing at all, and to people who read one another by that light it made her unreadable, faceless, a V-Harl you could not take the temperature of. She was reclamation. Her office existed to make records stop existing. Where the Asyers stilled minds, Iprith stilled events, a leaked protocol, a rogue reading, a station that had produced a specimen it could not explain. She had come to make the Meridian's problem quiet in the older, simpler sense of the word. "Show me the anomaly," she said. Those were the first words Sale heard her speak. Vosk showed her. He walked her to the ward with the stiff, formal deference of an old physician who has summoned an authority above his own, and is beginning to understand what he has invited into his house. The specimen was on the cradle, restrained at 7 points, sedated to the floor. Sale had put him back under before the docking, at his own instruction, and he had gone willingly, easily, folding himself back into the dark with the calm of a man stepping into a doorway to watch the street. The trace climbed on the board. Iprith looked at the trace for a long time. Then she looked at the sedated body. Then she said, without inflection, the thing that told Sale exactly what kind of instrument the overseer was. "You woke it." The ward went cold. "The subject has been under continuous deep sedation for." "The trace has a discontinuity," Iprith said. She reached past Vosk and drew back the last 3 nights of the record with a stranger's authority over his own logs, and there it was, the small spike Sale had watched Cole make when he taught himself to speak through the block, the smaller spikes of the 2 nights she had walked him through the station. It surfaced 3 times. The last surface lasted, she measured it, long enough to move. She turned her dark, unreadable throat patch on the assembled Asyers, and Sale felt every one of them, herself included, become a specimen. Someone on this station has been walking a live clamor world native through a sealed stilling house. That is not an assay anomaly. That is a breach, a pause exactly 1 beat long. I will find which of you it was, but first I will close the breach at its source. She had the security cast bring a device Sale had never seen. It was not an assay instrument. It did not read. It only delivered, and what it delivered was the older answer, the answer the quiet had used before the hush was ever refined, in the days when the loud were simply put down. Iprith called it the purge. It flooded the cortical seat, not with the gentle severing agent of the hush, but with a raw, undirected storm. Not a scalpel to close the extra windows one by one, but a hammer to shatter the whole structure at once, to induce in the loud mind a cascade so violent and so total that nothing on the far side of it could ever think again. It did not still. It ended. It left the body alive, breathing, warm and empty, a house with the wiring pulled out. It was, Iprith said, 100% effective. It had never once failed against a loud mind. It was, she said, unfortunate that it had to be used on a subject of such scientific interest, but the record could not be allowed to disembark, and the surest way to close a record was to empty the mind that carried it. "Wake it first," Iprith said. Sale's hands went cold on the console. "Overseer." "Wake it," I wanted aware, not for cruelty. Nothing in the dark throat patch suggested cruelty or anything else. The purge takes better against an active mind. A sedated brain is a slack target. Bring it up. Let it fill. Then I break it full. And Sale, who had falsified a ledger, who had walked a specimen through the holds, who had crossed every line, she had looked at the console, and understood that she had no line left to hold this back, that Iprith's authority erased hers as completely as the purge would erase Cole, and that in a moment she was going to bring Cole Renner up out of the dark into a room built to end him, and there was nothing an 11-year Asyer of the 9th grade could do about it at all. She brought him up. He surfaced the way he always surfaced now, easy, unhurried, opening his brown eyes to the low lights of the ward, and he took in the overseer and the two of the security cast and the device in their hands, and he read it. Sale watched him read it, watched the model behind his eyes take in a new object and turn it over and understand it in the space of a breath. And he did not tense, and he did not plead, and he did not look at Sale. He looked at Iprith, at the dark, unreadable throat patch that no Viharo could take the temperature of, and he smiled the small smile Sale had learned to fear, and he said, "You turned your light off." Iprith said nothing. "Smart. Everyone here reads by the throat, so you burned yours out and now none of them can see you coming. It works on them." His voice was low and level and did not hurry. "It doesn't work on me. I don't read the light, Overseer. I never did. The light is for beginners. I read the 8 muscles around your eyes and the tremor in your third finger and the half beat you take before you speak and the 4 words you use when 3 would do. You've been aboard 90 minutes and you've told me more than the chief told me in a week, and you've told me all of it with your light off." He tilted his head. "You came here to make a record stop existing, but you're standing in the record. You are the newest, loudest entry in it, and you brought me exactly the thing I needed." "You need nothing," Iprith said. "In a moment, you will be nothing." "In a moment," Cole agreed, "you're going to fill me up so the hammer takes better and then you're going to swing it." He said it without fear, the way he said everything, a man confirming a figure. "Go ahead, fill me up. I've spent 8 days begging these people to give me more and you walked in with the biggest dose on the station." The smile again, smaller. "You really should have asked the chief how that's been going." Iprith swung the hammer. Sale would try, afterward, to describe what the purge did to Cole Renner, and she would never find the words, because there were no Viharo words for it. The ledger had 100 words for stilling, and none at all for a loud mind under the purge that did not break. She could only describe what she saw. She saw the raw storm go into him, the undirected cascade that had ended 10,000 loud minds, the hammer that had never failed. She saw the trace on the board leap, not the slow climb of the hush but a violent, vertical spike. The whole structure of his cognition hit at once with more input than any mind could survive. She saw his body seize against the 7-point restraint. She saw the 2 of the security cast look at their device to confirm it had discharged, and confirm it, and look, with the first flicker of something in their eyes, at the board. She saw the trace come down. Not flat, that was the thing. The purge left flat. Flat was the whole point of it, flat forever. The trace did not go flat. It came down off the violent spike and it did not keep falling into the dark. It settled, quivering, shaken, wounded. She could see that it was wounded, could see the cost of it in the ragged edge of the line. But it settled above the baseline, above the shaded band, back into the high country where it had lived for 8 days. And after a moment, ragged and slow and hurt, it began again to climb. Cole Renner opened his eyes. There was blood at the corners of them, thin and dark, a loud world body paying a loud world cost, and his face was gray with it and his breath came hard, and when he spoke his voice was a wreck. But he spoke. "That one hurt," he said. The ward was silent. Iprith's dark throat patch showed nothing, but her third finger had begun, very slightly, to tremble, and Cole was watching it, and everyone in the ward who understood what they were looking at understood that the overseer had just done the one thing her whole office existed to prevent. She had brought the hammer. She had swung it full, and the record was still on the cradle, awake, bleeding and getting smarter, and now it knew that the last, oldest, surest answer of the quiet did not work either. "It doesn't shatter," Cole said to the room, to all of them, his wrecked voice patient. "You keep expecting me to shatter. I want to explain why I don't, because it matters, and because after today none of you are ever going to be able to unknow it." He breathed. "Your minds are made of glass, beautiful glass. One clean pane, and when you hit it hard enough it breaks, and that's the purge. You built a hammer for glass, but I'm not glass. Where I'm from, everything's already broken all the time and you live inside the break. My mind isn't one pane, It's 10,000 shards already, and it runs on the shards, and it always has. You can't shatter a thing that's made of shatter. The small smile, bloody now. You can only give it more pieces. Purge again, Iprith said. Her voice did not change, her finger trembled. Second discharge, immediate. Overseer, one of the security caste said, the first time either of them had spoken. A second discharge at this interval will. Purge again. They purged again. And Cole Renner took the second hammer the way he had taken the first, seizing and bleeding and paying a cost Sale could see was mounting. A cost no loud world body could pay forever. And when it was done, the tray spiked and came down and did not go flat. And climbed, ragged, hurt, higher than before, and Sale understood, standing frozen at her console, that Iprith had walked into the same trap Vosk had walked into on the first day. The trap the whole quiet had been walking into for 1,000 years without ever once seeing the shape of it. Every answer they had was a way of pouring more into the loud mind. The hush poured. The purge poured. Sedation, waking, hammer, scalpel, every instrument the Viharo possessed was built to overwhelm, because overwhelming was how you killed Glass, and they had never in their history met a mind that did not run on being overwhelmed. They could not stop feeding him. It was the only thing they knew how to do. Their entire civilization was a machine for making the loud louder, and they had aimed all of it, at maximum power, at the one loud world native on the meridian, and every discharge made him worse. Stop, Sale said. She said it aloud in the ward in front of the overseer, and heard her own voice do it, and did not take it back. Iprith turned the dark throat patch on her. Asir. You have to stop. Sale's voice shook and she let it shake. Every discharge feeds it. Look at the trace. You are not ending him. You are training him. The purge is a lesson and he's learning it faster than you can teach it. And if you discharge that device a third time, the only thing that changes is he'll know the device better than the people who built it. She was breathing hard. 11 years of hierarchy came apart in her chest, and she let it come apart. I have watched this for 8 days. I am telling you the thing no one on this station will tell you because they're afraid of your light. You cannot switch him off. There is no dose. There is no hammer. The instrument is honest, and the instrument says you cannot win this by pushing harder, because harder is the food he lives on. The ward held its breath. Cole Renner, bleeding on the cradle, looked at Sale with something in his exhausted face that she had not seen there before, not calculation, not the model turning over a new object, but something plainer and older and, she thought, almost human. There it is, he said softly. That's the one. That's the mind on the station that trusts its instruments more than its fear. He turned his ruined gaze back to the overseer. She just told you the truth, and you're going to punish her for it because your whole civilization punishes the instrument for the reading. But you should listen to her, overseer. She's the only reason any of you are going to walk off this station alive. He let his head fall back against the cradle, spent. Including you. Iprith did not purge a third time. Sale took that in the moment for a small victory. The overseer's dark throat patch turning away from the device. The two of the security caste lowering it, and understood only later that it had not been mercy or reason but arithmetic. Iprith had watched the same 8 muscles Cole read on her, in reverse. She had done her own sum, and the sum said that the loud world native had just used her own overseer's authority to make a junior Asir say, aloud, in front of the security caste, the one-sentence reclamation existed to prevent from ever being said. You cannot win this. A third discharge would only carve that sentence deeper into the minds of the very crew Iprith would shortly have to decide whether to erase. So she stopped. And then she did the thing an eraser does when a record starts talking. She began separating the people who had heard it. Confine the Asir, she said, and the security caste took Sale. They did it without violence, because the Viharo rarely needed violence among their own, a hand at the elbow, a direction given, the crushing weight of a hierarchy that had never in Sale's life been disobeyed until she disobeyed it. They walked her out of the ward. The last thing she saw before the seal closed was Cole Renner on the cradle, gray and bloodied and climbing, turning his head to watch her go, and the small shape his mouth made was not the fearful smile now but something steadier, something that she would only later understand had been reassurance. Hold on. It's already moving. They put her in a med hollow on the second ring. Not a cell, the Meridian had no cells, it had never needed one, and sealed it with an authority above her own, and left her alone with the low sleeping lights and the great gray face of Sol filling the port, and Sail, who had spent 11 years as the sharpest instrument of the quiet, sat in the dark and discovered that she had no idea what happened next, and that this was, in its own strange way, the freest she had ever felt. She was wrong that she had no idea. She had the model. Not Cole's, she could not run his. No V-Harl could, but a smaller, cruder one built in 8 days at his side, and it told her one thing with cold clarity. Iprith would now go to Vosk, and Iprith and Vosk would disagree, and the disagreement would be the seam. Cole told her about the seam later when it was over, in the flat, unhurried voice he used for the truth. But Sail reconstructed most of it herself, from the shape of what followed, and from the one conversation she was allowed to overhear. The disagreement between the overseer and the chief Asir was the oldest kind. Iprith wanted the record closed. Vosk wanted the record kept. To Iprith, the specimen was a breach, a thing that should not exist, that undermined the whole doctrine of the quiet, that if it ever reached open space would tell the loud worlds the one fact the V-Harl had spent 1,000 years making sure they never learned, that the hush could be beaten, that stilling was not destiny, that the deep holds were not hospitals. Every hour Cole Renner drew breath, that fact drew closer to escaping. The only safe record was an empty one. Erase the specimen. Erase the Asirs who had watched it. If necessary, erase the Meridian and log it as a hull loss, a slow accident far from anything, a station that had simply gone quiet in the dark the way old stations did. The quiet had absorbed such losses before. To Vosk, the specimen was the single most important discovery in the history of V-Harl medicine, and he was a physician before he was anything else. In 8 days, a Loud World native had done what no Loud World native had ever done: survived the hush, survived the purge, walked the halls, spoken the cant, outread the overseer. Vosk had spent 400 years believing he understood the loud mind. He had been wrong, catastrophically and totally wrong, and there was in him, Sail had read it in his amber light long before Iprith arrived, the terrible, specific hunger of an old scientist who has glimpsed, at the very end of his life, that everything he built his life on was mistaken, and who cannot bear to erase the proof before he understands it. Vosk did not want to save Cole Renner. Vosk wanted to keep him, to study him, to finally, before he died, understand the thing his civilization had been murdering for 1,000 years. And Cole Renner, who read the 8 muscles around the eyes, had seen that seam on the first day, in the flicker of an old man's throat light stuttering toward white, and had spent 8 days quietly, patiently, working a knife into it. He did it the only way a bound man on a cradle could do anything, with words, aimed with a precision that terrified Sail when she understood it. To Vosk, in the hours after the purge, he talked medicine. He offered the old physician the thing the old physician could not resist understanding, in exchange for time. He explained, in careful clinical cant, exactly why the hush had failed, framed as a gift, a collaboration, the greatest paper the ledger would ever hold. And he let Vosk see that every hour Cole lived was an hour of discovery, and every discharge of Iprith's hammer was an act of vandalism against the most important patient in V-Harl history. He made Vosk into his advocate without Vosk ever noticing he had been recruited, because Vosk wanted to be recruited, because the hunger was already there, and Cole had only fed it. And to Iprith, in the same hours, through the same restraints, he talked about the record. You can't close it, he told her. Sail pieced this together afterward, but she believed every word because she knew by then exactly how he worked. You think you can. You think you empty me and you empty the Asirs and you scuttle the station and the fact goes dark. But you've already lost the fact, Overseer, and you lost it 8 days ago, before you ever docked. He would have said it flat, patient, a man walking her through a sum she was too frightened to do herself. Your chief assay sent a transmission requesting your presence. Reclamation escalations are logged at the Overseer's office on the far side of the volume. That log exists. It says a 9th grade stilling house produced an anomaly severe enough to require an eraser. You can scuttle the meridian. You cannot scuttle the log that says you had to. And the day your own office starts asking why a routine assay needed reclamation, that's the day the fact you're trying to bury starts digging itself up inside the quiet where you can't reach it. A pause. You didn't come here to close a record. You came here to become one. He was lying partly. Sale worked that out later too. The escalation log was real, but it was not the trap he made it sound. The quiet's own bureaucracy would have buried it in an age. What was true was subtler and worse, and Cole knew which truth to hide inside the lie. What was true was that the moment Iprith started to believe she might already have lost, the moment the eraser began to fear she was herself becoming the thing that needed erasing, she stopped being able to act cleanly. A frightened instrument is an imprecise instrument. Cole did not need to defeat the Overseer. He only needed to make her hesitate and disagree with the chief assayer and turn the sharp single edge of the quiet's authority against itself. He needed the machine to argue with itself, because a machine arguing with itself is a machine not watching the door. And while it argued, he worked on the security cast. There were 2 of them, and their names were D. Helm and Orit, and they were the closest thing the Meridian had to soldiers, bred broad and strong and quiet, trained to the older answers, loyal to Reclamation because Reclamation was the only office that had ever wanted them. Cole had one advantage with them that he had with no one else on the station. They were the only Viharl aboard who had ever been treated as instruments themselves, used and put away, and a man who has spent 8 days being an instrument on a cradle knows exactly how to talk to another one. He talked to D. Helm first, because D. Helm was the one who had spoken up during the second purge, "We'll change the interval," the one whose eyes had flickered when the trace refused to go flat. Cole had marked him in that instant, not the loyal one, the one who noticed. Sale did not hear those conversations. But she knew their result, because on the 10th day the Med-Hollow seal on her door, the seal set by an authority above her own, that she had no right to touch, cycled open from the outside. And D. Helm of the security cast stood in the doorway, broad and gray and unreadable, and looked at her for a long moment, and said, in the low, flat voice of his caste, "The specimen says you're the one who reads the instruments." A pause. "He says when the station starts to come apart, the assayers will read the panic and run the wrong way, and the serval cast will read their masters and freeze, and the only Viharl aboard who will read the actual instrument and act on it is you." Another pause, longer, the pause of a bred instrument doing something it was not bred to do. "He says to bring you to the ward. He says it's time." Sale stood. "Why," she said, "are you doing this? Your reclamation, you're hers." D. Helm looked at her with the flat gray patience of the used. "The specimen did a thing no one's ever done to me," he said. "He asked me what happens to the security cast after a station gets erased." He turned to lead her out. "I'd never thought about it. Turns out I already knew the answer. Turns out I've helped do it." He stopped at the threshold, and for just a moment the flat gray light of his throat patch flickered, the first flicker Sale had ever seen from a member of his caste. "We're witnesses too, every one of us who ever swung the hammer. She'll close us the same as the rest when the loud world start asking questions because we're the record too." He walked. "The loud one is the first person in my life who ever told me that out loud. I don't much care whether he lives, but I'm not going to be quietly erased for 1,000 years of her office's tidiness. So, the ward." Sale followed the eraser's own soldier through the sleeping rings of the meridian, toward the ward, toward the loud mind that had, in 10 days, without ever raising his voice, without ever leaving the cradle for more than an hour, begun to take the sharpest machine of the quiet quietly and completely apart. The ward, when D. Helm brought her back to it, was not the ward she had left. Cole Renner was off the cradle. He sat on the edge of it, unrestrained, wrapped in a serval-cast thermal drape someone had found for him, and he was thinner than 4 days ago and grayer, and the blood had been cleaned from the corners of his eyes, but the vessels there had burst and stayed burst, so that his brown gaze looked out at the world from a field of red, and it should have made him look like a broken thing. It did not. It made him look like a man who had paid a price and was still standing at the counter, waiting for the rest of his change. Vosk was there, at his own console, watching Cole with the fixed, starving attention of the old physician he had become. And Orit, the second of the security caste, the loyal one, the one who had not noticed, stood at the ward's far seal, and it took Sale a moment to understand that Orit was not guarding Cole. Orit was confined, disarmed, standing very still under the flat gray regard of his own partner D. Helm, who had, at some point in the last day, chosen a side. "Good," Cole said when he saw Sale. "That's everyone I need." He said it the way a man closes a ledger. "Sit down, SL. We don't have long, and I want you to understand it, because when it happens you're the one who has to act, and you can't act on a plan you don't believe." She said. "The overseer is going to erase the station," Cole said. "Not maybe. She decided an hour ago." The chief talked her out of it 4 times, and the 5th time she stopped listening to him, which I needed, because as long as she was arguing with him she wasn't acting, and I needed the days that argument bought. He said this with no triumph, laying out figures. "Here's how erasure works on a station like this. You don't blow it up that's loud that leaves debris. Debris is a record. You do it quiet. Every assay station has a scuttle protocol built into its core. A controlled failure that vents the atmosphere, stops the ring spin, kills the heat, and lets the whole thing go cold and dark and slow, so that anyone who finds it a century later finds a hull loss, an accident, a station that just stopped. No bodies with holes in them. No sign of a fight. Just 41 Vharl and a hold full of the stilled, all gone quietly to sleep in the dark." He let that sit. "That's the machine's own logic. And I told you on the first day, a logic has a seam, and a seam is where you put the knife." "You want to stop the scuttle," Sale said. "No," he shook his head once. "That's the mistake she'll expect, and it's the wrong move anyway. If I stop the scuttle, she just orders it again, or does it by hand, or the security caste does it, and we're fighting the whole station for control of one protocol." The red gaze held her. "I don't want to stop the scuttle, SL. I want to run it. I want to be the one holding the knife when she reaches for it." Vosk made a low sound at his console. Sale realized he had already understood, and that understanding had frightened even him. "The scuttle protocol vents the atmosphere and cuts the heat," Cole said. "But before it does either of those things, it does one thing first, because it has to. It sends a single automated notice, a station loss beacon, so that the quiet's own network logs the meridian as gone and stops routing to it. It's not a distress call. Your people don't do distress. Distress is disorder. It's a tombstone. A quiet little packet that says this station is now silent, remove it from the ledger. It goes out on the quiet's own relays, at the quiet's own priority, through every interdiction picket between here and the core, and nobody stops it, nobody questions it, because it is the single most routine message a station ever sends, the sound of a machine reporting its own death." Sale understood then, and the cold of it ran down through every joint of her body the way it had on the first day, watching the line climb. "You want to change the message," she said. "I want to change the message," Cole agreed softly. "I've spent 10 days learning your language and your systems and your relay protocols from the inside, and the one packet on this entire station that goes out unquestioned at top priority, through every checkpoint between here and the heart of the quiet, is the station's own tombstone. So when the overseer reaches for the scuttle, when the eraser finally decides to make the meridian quiet, she is going to send, with her own authority on her own order, the loudest message the loud worlds have ever received. The small shape of the mouth, bloody-eyed, patient. The tombstone still goes out. The station still reports its own death, but riding underneath it where your relays won't look because they never look at a tombstone is everything. The holds, the number of worlds, the ledger of stilled worlds, what the hush is, what reclamation does. 10 days of your own logs, which D. Heln is pulling for me right now, addressed to a human survey relay that the cormorant was 3 weeks out from when you took her, and which is still, if I've counted right, and I've counted right, inside the reach of your own network's edge. The ward was silent. You've been listening for us your whole civilization, Cole said. 1,000 years of interdiction sloops sitting quiet in the dark, catching our ships, stilling our loud ones, making sure the fact never got out. And you were good at it. You were so good at it that the loudest world in the galaxy went 1,000 years without ever knowing you were there. The red gaze did not waver. You built the perfect silence. And then you put the one loud mind that eats your medicine at the exact console where your own death notice gets sent at top priority through every picket unquestioned. You didn't just fail to still me, Overseer. He was not looking at Iprath. She was not in the room, but he said it to her anyway, to the machine, to the whole quiet. You handed me the one voice in your entire civilization that no one is allowed to interrupt, and I'm going to use it to introduce you to my world. It won't work, Vosk said. He had been silent so long that Sale had half forgotten the old physician was capable of speech. That was not a question aimed at his impossible patient. But now he rose from his console, translucent and trembling and 400 years old, and he faced the man on the cradle with the last authority he had left, which was not the authority of the chief Asir, but the older, sadder authority of someone who has understood a thing fully and too late. It won't work, Vosk said again, because you have made one error, and it is the error your kind always makes, and it is why we were never afraid of you. His amber light was gone, his throat patch showed the pale flutter of grief. You are one mind. A brilliant mind, I concede it. I who have spent my life certain no loud mind could be brilliant, I concede it entirely but one. And a message is not a mind. Your death notice will go out, yes. It will ride your logs to a human relay, yes. And a loud world will receive all at once the fact that we exist, that we have been taking you for 1,000 years, that your dead are not dead but sleeping in our holds. The old physician's voice did not rise, but it shook. And what will your loud world do with that fact? It will do what loud worlds do. It will erupt. It will scream. 10 billion loud minds all at once, in rage and grief and terror, spilling in every direction, thinking 6 things at once and half of them wrong, a whole world of noise, unfocused, ungoverned, a storm with no eye. That is what we have always known about you. That is why the hush was mercy and not conquest. You cannot hold a clean line. You cannot act as one. Give a loud world the worst news it has ever heard, and it will tear itself apart before it ever tears at us. We do not fear your anger, clamor world native. We have watched your anger for 1,000 years. Your anger is the loudest and most useless thing in the galaxy. Cole Renner listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He let the old physician finish, and there was, Sale thought, something almost gentle in the way he waited. The patience of a man letting someone he has already beaten say the thing they need to say. You're right, Cole said, when Vosk was done. That's exactly what a loud world does with bad news. It erupts. 10 billion minds all at once, screaming in every direction. He nodded slowly, agreeing, and Sale felt the trap close because she had spent 10 days watching him agree just before he took something apart. You've watched us for 1,000 years, and that's the one thing you actually learned. And you built your whole understanding of us on it, and you missed the only part that mattered, the same way your architects missed that someone might stand in the galleries, and your doctors missed that a mind might eat the hush. He leaned forward on the edge of the cradle, red-eyed, unhurried. You've only ever seen the eruption, Chief Asir. You took our ships and stilled our loud ones and went home before the next part. You never once stayed to watch what a loud world does after it erupts. And what, Vosk said, does it do? It organizes, Cole said. That's the thing you can't imagine because your mind runs one clean line and ours run 10,000 shards, and you think 10,000 shards can only ever be chaos. But we've been 10,000 shards since before we could walk, and we learned the one trick you never had to learn because your worlds were quiet. We learned how a billion screaming minds become one. He held up a thin, worn hand. It's ugly. It's loud. It comes apart and reforms and argues with itself the whole way, and to you it'll look like a storm with no eye, right up until the moment it puts a fist through your chest. You saw the eruption and called it the whole of us. But the eruption is just the sound a loud world makes while it's deciding where to point. The red gaze was very steady. You're about to give 10 billion of us the same news you gave me, and you think we'll scream and tear ourselves apart. The small shape of the mouth. We will scream, and then we'll come here together as one, the way a loud world always does when you finally give it something loud enough to organize around. You didn't build the perfect silence, Chief Assay. You spent 1,000 years building the perfect reason for the loudest world in the galaxy to finally point in one direction. And you're about to hand me the microphone. Iprith came back to the ward, with the scuttle order already in her hand. She came alone, no security cast flanking her now, because one of them was confined at her own ward's far seal, and the other had opened a door he should not have opened. And Sale saw the overseer register both facts as she entered, saw the dark throat patch that showed nothing taken D-Helm standing loyal to the wrong side, taken or it disarmed, taken the confined Assay sitting free and the specimen off the cradle, and saw her decide, in the space of a step, that the Meridian was no longer a station she controlled. It was a station she needed to end. Chief Assay, Iprith said, you have lost your house. I have lost more than that, Vosk said quietly, and did not move to stop her. Iprith crossed to the core console, not the ward's console, the deeper one, the scuttle seat, the seat that held the machine's own logic for its own death, and she keyed her overseer's authority into it, the authority above all others aboard, the authority that could order 41 V'Harl and a hold full of the stilled to go cold and quiet and slow in the dark. She did it without ceremony. Erasers did not do ceremony. She entered the scuttle order the way Sale had once entered a second measure of the hush. Because it was the procedure, because her hands knew it before her judgment agreed, because a lifetime inside a hierarchy makes the hands loyal even at the end. You should not have explained it to me, Iprith said to Cole without turning from the console. That was your error, Clamor World native. You told me the beacon carries your record, so I will not send the beacon. I will scuttle by hand, vent the rings, cut the heat, kill the ward, and let the station die without ever announcing it. No tombstone, no packet, no voice for you to ride. The Meridian simply never reports in again, and in a century someone finds a cold hull, and there is no message because I will have sent none. The dark patch turned at last toward him. You outthought a doctor and a soldier. You did not outthink an eraser. Erasers do not close records by sending messages. We close them by making sure no message is ever sent at all. And Cole Renner, sitting on the edge of the cradle in a serval-cast drape with his eyes full of burst blood, tired beyond anything Sale had a word for, said, I know, that's why I sent it 4 hours ago. The ward went very still. You've been aboard 10 hours this rotation, Cole said, and you spent 9 of them arguing with the Chief Assay because I made sure you would, because as long as the eraser was arguing about whether to act, she wasn't watching the one instrument that mattered. D-Helm pulled the logs at the start of the rotation. I had him seat them under a scuttle beacon and route it 4 hours ago, not the full scuttle, just the tombstone, just the one packet your network never questions, addressed to a human relay at the edge of your own reach. His voice was a wreck, but the words came clean and ordered, each one already finished before he spoke it. It cleared this station 3 hours ago. It cleared the first interdiction picket 2 hours ago, at your own priority, unquestioned, because it is the single most routine message a station ever sends. Right now it's crossing the last picket between here and open space. the small shape of the mouth. You didn't come back here to stop the scuttle, Overseer. You came back to stop me. And while you were coming back, the message was already gone. Iprith moved faster than Sale had known a Vharl could move. She did not go for Cole. That was the thing Sale would remember. The eraser did not waste emotion on the man. She had already, in an instant, done the arithmetic Cole had taught the whole station to fear, and the arithmetic said the man no longer mattered, the message mattered, and the message could still, perhaps, be caught. She spun to the core console and tore her overseer's authority across it and reached, with the speed of an instrument built for one purpose, for the only move left on the board, the recall. Every packet on the Quiet's network could be recalled by an authority high enough, killed in flight, pulled back before it cleared the last picket, and an overseer's seal was high enough, and there was still, if the man's count was right and the packet was truly crossing the last picket now, a handful of moments in which the loudest message the loud worlds had ever nearly received could be reached out of the dark and unsent. "Die Helm," Cole said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He had spent 10 days teaching the security caste that they were witnesses too, that the eraser would close them the same as the rest, and he had spent 10 hours letting Die Helm watch exactly how Reclamation treated the people who served it. And now, in the one moment it mattered, he simply said the soldier's name, and the soldier who had opened the wrong door moved to close the last one. Die Helm put himself between Iprith and the recall. It was not a fight the way the ledger would have understood a fight. The Vharl did not fight. The Quiet had bred fighting out of itself in favor of the older, cleaner answers, and even the security caste, even the ones bred broad and strong for the purposes no one named, went to violence the way a language goes to a word it has almost forgotten. But Iprith was Reclamation, and Reclamation remembered, and Die Helm was one soldier who had chosen his side 10 hours ago against a lifetime of the other, and Sale watched two members of a species that had spent 1,000 years insisting it was above such things try, clumsily, terribly, to kill each other over a console at the heart of a dying station. Iprith reached the recall. Die Helm pulled her off it. She struck him with the flat, hard edge of a device Sale did not see clearly, and he folded at the knee and did not go down, got a broad gray arm across her, drove her back from the seat, and behind them the core console, half-keyed with an overseer's authority and no clean hands to finish the sequence, began to do the thing Iprith had started before Cole spoke and never finished stopping. It began to scuttle the station. The rings did not stop all at once. The meridian was old and vast, and its death, once begun, was patient. But Sale felt it in the deck first, the deep change in the ring spin, the great slow shudder of a station that had turned steadily for longer than she had been alive and was now, by an overseer's half-finished order, beginning to let go. The lights dropped to the deep red of a core fault. Somewhere far out on the fourth ring, an atmosphere seal cycled and did not cycle back, and Sale heard, through the deck, through the flexing hull Cole had taught himself to read, the first long sigh of air leaving a place that would never hold it again. "There it is," Cole said. He had not moved from the edge of the cradle. He had no strength left to move. Sale understood that now, understood that he had spent the last of a loud world body on 10 days of being fed hammers, and that the man giving orders in the flat, unhurried voice was running on a mind that had long since outlasted the flesh it was sealed in. She started the scuttle and then stopped watching it to chase the message. Now she can't do both. She can finish killing the station, or she can catch my packet before it clears the last picket. She doesn't have the hands for both, and neither do you, Chief Assier, and neither does Die Helm, who's about to lose that fight because she's Reclamation and he's just brave. The red gaze turned at last and found Sale. "That's why I needed you back in this room, SL, not for the message. The message is already gone. It clears the picket in a few minutes whether anyone in here lives or dies. I needed you here for the part that comes after, because in a few minutes this station finishes coming apart, and the Asyrs will read the panic and run the wrong way, and the serval cast will freeze, and D-Helm will be down, and the chief will stand in the ruin of everything he believed and do nothing. He drew a breath that cost him. And the only Viharil aboard who reads the actual instrument and acts on it is you. You're the one who has to get them out. All of them. The crew. And the holds. The holds, Sale said. The stilled. Worlds of them, rank on rank, sleeping in the inner ring of a station that was killing itself around them. The holds, Cole said. You asked me on the first day if I wanted to keep being the doctor or wanted to live. I'll ask you the last one. The small shape of the mouth, gentle now, almost kind, a man handing over the one tool he had left. You've spent 11 years putting loud minds into those rows and calling it mercy. The station's dying. You've got minutes. You can run for a pod and read the panic like everyone else and live the rest of your life as the Asyr who got out. The red eyes held her. Or you can go down to the holds while a station comes apart around you and start waking up 1,000 worlds worth of the people you helped put to sleep, because it turns out the loud ones don't drown and never did, and you know that better than anyone left alive. He let his head fall back against the cradle, spent to the floor, the last of the flesh giving out under the mind. Your instruments have been honest with you for 11 years, SL. Be honest back. Go read the holds. Sale did not decide to go to the holds. Her body decided. She was on her feet and moving before the choice finished forming, which was, she thought later, the most loud world thing she had ever done, to act on a conclusion her mind had reached before it announced itself. The way Cole had described his own kind, the model running ahead of the world. 11 years of the quiet and the specimen had taught her, in 10 days, to trust her hands. Behind her, D-Helm lost the fight. He lost it the way Cole had said he would, bravely, and not well, one soldier who had chosen his side 10 hours ago against an eraser who had been reclamation her whole life. Sale heard it more than saw it. The heavy sound of a broad gray body driven back into a console, the hard, flat discharge of the device Iprith carried, a silence where D-Helm's breathing had been. And then Iprith's voice, unhurried again, arithmetic restored. The message, the recall before the picket. Sale stopped at the ward seal. She should have run. Cole had told her to run to the holds, and the holds were the whole of the plan, and every heartbeat she spent in the ward was a heartbeat the still did not have. But she stopped, because she had done the sum two now, the loud world way, ahead of herself. If Iprith reached the recall and killed the message in flight, then the holds did not matter and the crew did not matter, and D-Helm had died for nothing, because the warning would go dark at the last picket and the 1,000-year silence would hold, and everything Cole Renner had paid would buy nothing at all. The message had to clear the picket, and Iprith was 3 steps from the seat that could pull it back. Sale was an Asyr. She had never struck anything in her life. But she had spent 11 years with her hands on consoles, and she knew, the way she knew her own name, exactly which sequence at that core seat would lock an overseer's authority out of the network for the 90 beats it took a packet to clear a picket, because it was the same lockout the Asyrs used to protect an assay in progress from interruption, the one procedure in the whole stilling house designed to say to a higher authority, "Wait, this instrument is doing something that cannot be stopped partway." She had used it 1,000 times to protect the stilling of loud minds. She reached the seat 1 step ahead of the overseer, and she used it to protect the loudest mind of all. Iprith's authority struck the console and found it locked by a junior Asyr seal, a seal below her own, that should have folded before her the way everything aboard the Meridian had always folded before reclamation. It did not fold. Sale had seated the lockout under an assay in progress flag, and the one thing an overseer's seal could not override in the whole architecture of the quiet was an assay the machine believed was still running, because the quiet had built its entire law around the sacredness of the stilling, and Sale had just told the machine in its own language that a stilling was underway that must not be interrupted. It was not a lie. Somewhere out past the last picket, A loud mind was reaching 1,000 worlds. That was a stilling of a kind. The machine believed her. The machine held the door. "You do not know what you have done," Iprith said. "I read the instrument," Sale said, "and I acted on it." She backed away from the locked seat toward the seal, toward the holds. "You spent your whole life closing records, but you never learned to read them. The specimen did, I did. And the record you came here to erase just cleared the last picket because you were so busy chasing the message that you forgot to watch the assay." She reached the seal. 90 beats. That's how long the lockout holds. By the time it releases, your packet is in open space, and there is nothing in this volume with the authority to recall it because it isn't your packet anymore. It's a tombstone, the Meridian's own death, and no one recalls the dead. She went through the seal, and sealed it behind her with the last of her assayer's authority, and left the overseer of reclamation locked in a dying ward with a soldier she had killed, and a physician she had broken, and a loud world native who was, at last, out of moves to make and simply sat, spent to the floor, watching the eraser understand that she had lost. The inner ring, when Sale reached it, was already going cold. The scuttle was patient, but it was thorough, and it had begun with the outer rings and was working inward, ring by ring, the way the V-Harl did everything, in order, without spillage, one clean line of dying at a time. The fourth ring was already vented. The third was venting. The heat was falling everywhere, the deep red core fault light throbbing in the long gray galleries, and the great slow shudder in the deck had become a groan as the ring spin bled away, and the station began, for the first time in its long life, to feel its own weight. The holds were on the inner ring. She had minutes, perhaps fewer. She came into the first gallery of the stilled and stopped, because the size of it defeated her the way it had defeated coal, rank on rank on rank of soft gray cradles, worlds of quieted minds, more sleeping loud ones than she could wake in 100 lifetimes, let alone the minutes the scuttle had left her. For 11 years she had walked these rows and seen finished work. Now she stood among them with a station dying around her and understood, fully and at last, what Cole had made her see at the mouth of this same gallery, that these were not the stilled, these were the suppressed. 1,000 worlds of loud minds that had not drowned, that had never drowned, that had only been forced down onto one clean line and held there, awake behind the quiet, for years, for a lifetime, for however long each of them had lain in this soft gray row while the V-Harl called it mercy. And if the hush did not kill, if it only held, then the reverse of the hush was not resurrection. It was release. You did not have to bring these minds back from the dead. You had to take your hand off them and let them come back up. Sale did not know how to do it. There was no procedure. The ledger ran in one direction, down into the quiet, and no assayer in 1,000 years had ever run it backward, because to run it backward you had to want the loud mind loud, and no V-Harl had ever wanted that. But she had watched Cole improvise for 10 days, had learned the shape of it, and she knew, she had always known, it was written in every trace she had ever logged, that the hush was a holding agent, that it needed to be maintained, that a stilled mind held its quiet only because the cradle fed it a slow, constant, gentle trickle of the agent, the way you hold a door shut by leaning on it. You could stop leaning on the door. She went to the nearest cradle and found the maintenance trickle, and with hands that shook and did not stop shaking, she shut it off. Nothing happened. For a long, terrible span, long enough that she nearly moved on, nearly gave the whole gallery up as beyond her, nearly turned for a pod and the reading of the panic, nothing happened at all. The soft gray shape in the cradle lay as it had lain for however many years it had lain there, quiet, held, suppressed. Then the trace on the cradle's small board, the low, flat, gentle hum of a stilled thing, twitched. It twitched and steadied and began, slowly, raggedly, like a thing surfacing from very deep water, like a window opening after a long time painted shut, to climb. Sale went down the first row shutting off doors. She did not have time to be gentle, and she did not have time to be sure. She went from cradle to cradle in the dying red light with the deck groaning under her, and at each one she found the maintenance trickle and shut it off and moved on, and behind her, one by one, in a long, slow, ragged wave down the gallery of the stilled, the flat, gentle hums began to twitch and steady and climb. She did not know what she was waking. She did not know if the minds coming up behind her would surface whole, or broken, or wild, or grateful, or in a rage 1,000 worlds deep at the species that had held them under for a lifetime. She only knew that they had not drowned, that they had never drowned, and that the alternative to waking them was to leave 1,000 worlds of the suppressed to go cold and quiet and slow in the dark, while a Viharal ran for a pod, and that she had spent 11 years being the hand on those doors, and that she would spend whatever minutes she had left taking the hand away. She was 3 rows in when the old physician found her. Vosk came into the gallery of the stilled through the far seal, translucent and trembling in the red Corfault light, and Sale stopped with her hand on a maintenance trickle and braced for the end of it. The chief Asir come to stop her, to protect the finished work, to lean back on every door she had opened. He crossed the gallery slowly, 400 years old, the pale architecture showing through his thinning skin, and he stopped beside her and looked down the long row she had already woken, at the ragged wave of climbing traces, at a lifetime of his own certainty coming up out of the deep water, one shut door at a time. "I have stilled 40,000 minds," Vosk said. His voice did not shake. That was the worst of it, with my own seal, believing every one of them a mercy. He looked at his own hands, the longest fingers trembling with age and strain. The specimen offered me understanding in exchange for time, and I took the offer because I am a physician and I could not bear to die ignorant. He gave me the understanding an hour ago. I have been standing in the ward holding it since. The pale flutter of grief moved in his throat patch. 40,000, awake the whole time, behind the quiet, held down onto one clean line by my hand for years, and I called it healing and went home to my sleep hollow and slept. Sale said nothing. There was nothing to say that the climbing traces were not already saying. "You cannot wake this gallery alone," Vosk said. "There is not time. One Asir in the minutes the scuttle has left wakes perhaps a single row." He turned from her and moved to the next cradle down, and Sale watched the chief Asir of the meridian, the oldest instrument of the quiet, find the maintenance trickle with the sure old hands that had shut 10,000 of them and shut it off, and take his hand away. But 2 Asirs wake 2 rows. He moved to the next. "And I know where every trickle on this ring is seated, Asir Sale, because I seated most of them myself." His voice was very steady and very old, and, for the first time since she had known him, entirely without the amber of a man performing a procedure he believed in. "So, let us run the ledger backward, you and I, while there is still a station to run it in. It is 400 years too late. It is the only honest thing I have ever done." He shut off the next door and the next. "Go faster. Do not be gentle. Gentleness is a thing you do when you have time, and we have none, and they have waited long enough." They ran the ledger backward, the 2 of them, down the long cold galleries of the inner ring, while the meridian died around them, one clean line at a time. Sale would never be able to say how many doors they opened. The number was not the point. Cole had taught her that on the first day, watching a line climb past every ceiling. The number was never the point. She took the odd rows and Vosk took the even, and the old physician moved faster than she would have believed a 400-year body could move, because he knew where every trickle was seated, because he had seated them, and there was in his speed the terrible energy of a man spending the last hour of a long life trying to unmake the other 400. Behind them the gallery filled, row by row, with the ragged rising traces of the surfacing. 1,000 quiet hums climbing all at once into a sound the holds had never held, not screaming. Not yet. Just the low building roar of a great many minds coming awake together in the dark. The first one surfaced fully, while Sale was 3 cradles down. She heard the cradle behind her cycle its restraints, the 7-point lock releasing, the way it released when an assay was complete, except this was the opposite of complete, and she turned, and a shape was sitting up in the soft gray row, slow and shaking. A loud world native of a species Sale did not know, thin and gray-skinned and long-armed, blinking in the red core-fault light at a gallery full of rising cradles and 2 V-Harl Asyrs running between them. It looked at Sale. Sale braced for the rage, the 1,000-world rage Cole had promised, the eruption Vosk had spent his life certain of. The woken thing did not erupt. It looked at Sale with eyes still swimming up out of a lifetime under the quiet, and it took in the dying station and the 2 V-Harl and the long rows of the still suppressed, and it did the thing Cole had told Vosk a loud world does after it erupts, the thing the V-Harl had never once stayed to watch. It organized. How long, it said. Its cant was rough, unpracticed, a language learned by a suppressed mind listening from behind the quiet for however many years it had lain there. The same trick Cole had used, Sale understood, the loud world trick, the model built out of everything that came in even when nothing was supposed to be getting in. How long have I been down? I don't know, Sale said. Years, I'm sorry. There isn't time, the station is dying, I have to keep opening. Then stop wasting it talking to me. The woken thing swung its long legs off the cradle, swayed, steadied, exactly the way Cole had swayed and steadied his first time up. Show me the trickles. I lay in that cradle listening to your kind seat them for 6 years. I know the sound of the mechanism. I can open a door as well as you can. It was already moving to the next cradle, already finding the maintenance seat with hands that shook and did not stop. You wake, you help wake the next helps wake the next. That's how a loud world does it. You should know that by now, quiet one. Your own machine's been telling you for 1,000 years, and you never once listened to the reading. By the time the 4th ring's death reached the inner galleries, there were not 2 of them running the ledger backward. There were 40, then 100. Then a number Sale stopped counting because counting was not the point, a rising, ragged, self-multiplying wave of the woken waking the woken. 1,000 worlds worth of the suppressed coming up out of the deep water and turning, without being asked, without being organized, without a single clean line among them, to pull the next one up. It was the loudest thing Sale had ever stood inside. It was chaos. It was 10,000 shards. And it moved through the dying holds of the meridian with a purpose no single mind had given it and no single mind could have stopped. And Sale, standing in the middle of it with her hands still shaking on the doors, understood at last, all the way down, the thing the quiet had spent 1,000 years failing to understand, that the noise was not the absence of order. The noise was a kind of order the V-Harl had simply never been built to hear. The station gave them less time than even Cole had counted. Sale felt the inner ring begin to go, the deep groan becoming a shriek, the core-fault light guttering toward the true dark, the first cold breath of a hull seal failing somewhere close. And she knew, with the loud world arithmetic she no longer questioned, that the galleries had minutes and then would have none. She found Vosk 3 rows over, still opening doors, and she took the old physician by the arm. Chief Asyr, it's failing. We have to get them to the pods. Go, Vosk said and did not stop. Take them. The pods are on the 2nd ring, forward the serval cast will know if any are left and the woken will carry the ones too deep to walk. Go Asyr Sale, lead them out. It is the loud world thing, is it not? The one who reads the instrument leads the others where the reading says to go. He shut off another door. That is you. It has been you since the first day, when your instrument said the line was climbing and you told him so with the chief Asyr standing over you. Go and be the reading. You're coming. I am opening doors, Vosk said, and there are a great many left, and I am 400 years old and I will not fit in a pod that a woken world could fill instead. He said it without weight, an old physician stating a dosage. You asked me, an hour ago, without asking it, whether I would keep being the doctor or would live. I have been the doctor for 400 years. I find at the very end that I would rather be honest. The pale flutter moved in his throat patch, and then, for the first time since Sale had known him, it steadied into something that was not amber and was not grief but was, she thought, almost peace. Every door I open is a mind I once closed. I intend to open as many as the station will let me. Go, and take the ones I have already opened and get them out, and let an old liar do one true thing in the dark. He turned back to the rows. And Asyr, when they ask you what happened here, and they will ask, do not tell them a story about a monster and a mercy. Tell them the reading. Tell them the line climbed and we called it a fault, and it was not a fault. Tell them we assayed the loudest world in the galaxy believing it was the weakest, and we were wrong, and the instrument told us the whole time, and no one read it until a junior Asyr of the 9th grade finally trusted her console over her chief. He did not look back. That is the true record. See that it is the one that survives. Sale left him in the gallery of the stilled, opening doors, and led a woken world to the pods. She never saw Iprith again. She learned later from the woken and from D. Helm's own partner Orit, who had been confined at the ward's far seal and so had lived, and who chose, in the end, the side his partner had died for, the shape of what happened to the overseer of reclamation. Iprith had stayed at the locked core seat for the 90 beats of Sale's lockout, waiting for the authority to release so she could reach the recall. The lockout had held. By the time it released, the message had cleared the last picket and was gone into open space, beyond any authority in the volume, a tombstone with 1,000 years of murder folded inside it, running for a human relay at the edge of the reach. And Iprith, the eraser, whose whole office existed to make sure no message was ever sent, had sat at a dead console in a dying ward, and understood that she had personally overseen the sending of the loudest message in the history of the quiet. She did not run for a pod, or it said she simply stayed. Perhaps she did the arithmetic, an overseer who returns to report that a 9th grade stilling house produced a record she could not close, and then broadcast it to the loud worlds, is an overseer who becomes a record herself, and Iprith had spent her life knowing exactly what happened to those. Or perhaps, Sale thought, it was something older and simpler, that a mind built to erase, confronted with the one thing it could not erase, had nothing left to be. Whatever it was, the overseer of reclamation stayed in the ward as the second ring went cold, and the meridian took her down into the quiet with it, and made of her the one thing she had spent her life denying to others, a witness that no one would ever get to unremember. Sale got the woken to the pods. Orit carried D. Helm's body to the last one and would not leave it, and Sale did not argue. The loud world thing, she was learning, was to let the ones who had paid carry what they needed to carry. And in the final pod, laid across two of the woken who held him the way the woken had already learned to hold their own, was Cole Renner, spent past speech, past sitting, a loud world body that had been fed hammers for 10 days and had nothing left, his red eyes half open, his chest still moving barely, the flesh at last catching up to what the mind had spent. He found Sale's face as the pod sealed, his mouth made a shape. No sound came, there was no sound left in him. But she had spent 10 days learning to read the 8 muscles around a face's eyes because he had taught her, and she read the shape his mouth made, and it was not triumph, and it was not fear. It was, go read the holds. She had. She read it back to him, the same shape, so he would know before the dark took him under whether it worked. And the pod fell away from the dying meridian into the cold light of Sol, one small bright splinter of a woken world falling free of the place that had held it under, and behind them the station that had spent 1,000 years perfecting silence finished, at last, going quiet. The pods drifted for 11 days. They were built to drift. A scuttled station's pods were tombstones of their own, designed to hold a little warmth and a little air, and carry the serval cast clear of a controlled death, and no one had ever built them for a load of the woken and the Asyrs who had freed them. They ran cold and close and thin. But the woken world inside them did the loud world thing, the thing the ledger had 1,000 words of horror for and not one word of understanding. It organized. It rationed the warmth without being told. It nursed the ones too deep to wake fully. It kept Cole Renner alive across 11 days on nothing but the shared body heat of the people he had freed and the stubborn refusal of a loud world crowd to let one of its own go quiet in the dark. Sale watched it and made herself remember every part of it, because Vosk had given her the last order she would ever take from a chief Asir: see that the true record survives, and the true record was this: that 1,000 minds the Quiet had called drowned, packed cold into a scuttle pod, did not tear themselves apart. They took turns. On the 11th day, the human ship found them. Sale felt it before the pods did, a change in the deck hum of her own small craft, a pull, the unmistakable settling of a larger mass taking a smaller one under its care. She pressed to the port and looked out at the thing that had come for them, and she understood, in the first instant, that Vosk had been right about one thing and catastrophically wrong about everything that mattered. He had been right that the loud world erupted. The message had reached the human relay on the 14th day after it cleared the last picket, and a loud world had received, all at once, the fact that it was prey, that its lost ships were not lost, that its dead were not dead, that a quiet, patient, gentle civilization had been reaching into the frayed edges of its space for 1,000 years, and carrying its loudest minds down into soft gray rows and calling it mercy. And the loud world had done exactly what Vosk said it would. It had erupted, 10 billion minds all at once, in rage and grief and terror. And then it had organized. The ship outside the port was not a scream. That was the thing Sale would spend the rest of her life trying to make the Quiet understand, and would mostly fail, because you cannot describe cold water to a thing that has never been anything but cold. The V'Harl had built their whole doctrine on the certainty that a loud world's response would be chaos, vast, spilling, ungoverned, a storm with no eye that would burn itself out before it ever reached them. And the loud world had sent, instead, a ship that was quiet. Not V'Harl quiet, not the quiet of a single clean line, a deeper quiet, the quiet of 10,000 shards that have finished arguing and agreed. It moved with no waste. It had come straight to Sol, straight to the coordinates folded inside Cole's tombstone, across a distance that should have taken far longer than it had, which meant the loud world had not paused to grieve before it moved, which meant it had done its grieving and its deciding and its building all at once, in parallel, the loud world way, and had arrived while the Quiet was still composing its first careful serial sentence about what to do. It took the pods aboard one at a time, with a patience that was not gentleness. And when Sale's pod cycled open into a human-holed, bright, harsh, loud world light, nothing like the soft red dark of the meridian, the loud world natives who came to take the Woken out did it with a calm that Sale recognized, because she had spent 10 days watching one man wear it. They were not angry. She had braced again for the anger. The ledger had promised her anger. They were not angry. They moved among the Woken and the Asirs with the low, level, procedural calm of people who had already, somewhere far away and 11 days ago, finished being angry, and had turned that anger into something colder and more useful, and had come a very long way to spend it precisely. One of them stopped in front of Sale. Sale was a V'Harl. She was one of the ones who had done this, who had run the intake assay, marked the loud ones for the stilling house, seeded the maintenance trickles, called it healing for 11 years. She stood in the bright, harsh light of a loud world hold, translucent and cold and entirely without authority, and waited for the loud world to do to her what she had helped the Quiet do to 1,000 of theirs. The human looked at her for a long moment. Then it said in careful, deliberately shaped V'Harl trade cant, which no human should have known, which meant the ship had learned it on the way, had reverse-built it from the logs in Cole's tombstone across 11 days of flight, the way Cole had built it across 6 days on a cradle. You're the Asir. The one who read the instrument. A pause, exactly 1 beat long, and Sale understood that she was being read, that the 8 muscles around her own eyes were being taken and turned over by a mind that did not need her light. He wrote you into it, before he went under, The whole record, and right in the middle of it, one line. The junior Asher trusted her console over her chief, and everything after that happened because of it. The human's face did something Sale did not yet know how to read. "We're not here for you, we're here for them." It nodded at the Woken streaming out of the pods into the bright loud light. "But he said you'd be standing there expecting to be closed, and he said to tell you the loud world doesn't close records. It reads them." A small movement of the mouth, the shape she had learned to fear and had learned over 10 days to trust. "Welcome aboard, witness. You've got a lot to tell us, and we've got a lot of doors left to open." Cole Renner did not die. He came very close, in the way a loud world body comes close after it has been made to run on nothing but its mind for 10 days, and it took him a long time to come back. And he did not come back the same. The burst vessels in his eyes healed, but something in him had been spent that did not fully return. A cost paid that Sale could see even when he could not. The price of 10 days at the top of an instrument scale. But he lived. And when he could sit up again, in a bright loud world medbay that was nothing like a ward, he asked for the Asher and they brought Sale to him, and the two of them sat for a while in the harsh, honest light with nothing between them anymore. No cradle, no restraint, no hush, no hierarchy. "You read the holds," Cole said. It was not a question. He had read her face the moment she came in. "We read the holds," Sale said. "Vosk and I, and then the Woken read them faster than we ever could. He was right, you were right. You wake the next wakes the next." It multiplied. "We opened a few hundred doors, and by the end there were 1,000 of them opening doors, and none of them waited to be asked." She looked at her own long, pale, trembling hands, the hands that had shut 10,000 doors and had, at the very end, learned to open a few. The chief Asher stayed. He wanted to open as many as the station would let him. It didn't let him any more. But he wanted the true record to survive, and I mean to make it survive, so I will tell you the part he made me promise to tell. She looked up. "He said we assayed the loudest world in the galaxy believing it was the weakest. He said the instrument told us the whole time and no one read it. He wanted that to be the record, not a story about a monster and a mercy. The reading." Cole was quiet for a while. The loud world light was very bright and very honest, and it hid nothing. And Sale saw in his worn face that the cost he had paid was real and would stay. "He understood at the end," Cole said. "That's more than most of your civilization is going to manage." He shifted, slow, the body still learning to be a body again. "You know what happens now. You've done the arithmetic I taught you how, or the hush did, or both." The small shape of the mouth. "The message went to every relay on our edge, not just the one. 10 billion of us know now. We know your interdiction line because it was in your own logs. We know where the stilling houses are, because your ledger kept records of everything, which turns out to be the one loud world habit your quiet civilization picked up, and it's going to end you. And we know the deep holds are full, 1,000 worlds of our people and other worlds' people, awake behind the quiet, waiting for someone to take a hand off a door." He met her eyes. "So here's what happens now, witness. We come, not in a rage. The rage was the first 2 weeks and it's over. We come the way that ship came for your pods, quiet, organized, and without waste. And we go down your whole interdiction line one stilling house at a time. And we read every hold, and we open every door. And your civilization, which spent 1,000 years certain it was performing a mercy, is going to have to sit very still and very quiet and watch the loudest world in the galaxy do the one thing it never imagined we could do together." He let it land, flat and cold and without triumph. "We're going to wake everyone up." The first stilling house they came to after Sol was a house Sale knew. She learned of it aboard the human ship in the days before they gave her back, from the ship's own quiet monitoring of the quiet's own channels. Because the loud world listened now, the way it had always listened, the way the cormorant had been listening at the frayed edge of space when Sale first ran her intake assay, except that now it listened with 1,000 years of the quiet's own logs to read the channels against. She heard the house go. It was a 4th-grade stilling house on the near line, larger than the Meridian, older and Sale had trained there in her second year, had learned to seat a maintenance trickle in its long gray galleries, had walked its holds believing she walked among the healed. The account came from an asser of that house who had lived, and who had spoken into the quiet's record afterward in the flat register of testimony, and the loud world had read the testimony the way it read everything, and Sale read it over the reader's shoulder in the bright honest light of the human hold, and she recognized in it, line for line, the shape of her own first day. The reading climbed, the asser had said, of the moment the human ships arrived. We took it for a fault. They had not fired on the house. That was in the testimony too, the asser's bafflement at it plain even through the flat register. A whole civilization braced for the eruption it had spent 1,000 years certain of, and the loud world had come the way it came for the pods, quiet and organized and without waste, and had taken the house intact. It had asked first. That was the part the asser could not fit into any category the ledger owned. The loud world had opened a channel and asked, in careful reverse-built cant, for the house to stand down and open its own holds, and give the loud minds inside them back without a single door being forced. And the chief asser of that fourth-grade house, an old translucent instrument of the quiet who had stilled loud minds for 300 years, had refused, because refusing was procedure, because the hands are loyal to the hierarchy, even after the judgment has begun to defect. So the loud world did it itself. It came into the house and it went down into the holds and it took the VHARL hands off the doors, gallery by gallery, and it woke everyone up, and it did not touch the assers at all, and that the asser's testimony said, in the one place the flat register cracked, that was the thing none of them could bear. The being spared. A screaming mob would have been survivable. You could hate a mob. You could die certain you had been right about the loud world all along. But the loud world walked through the house it had every reason to burn, and it did not burn it, and it did not harm the ones who had spent their lives leaning on the doors, and it left them standing, alive and unmarked, in the ringing new noise of 1,000 woken worlds coming up out of the dark, left them to live from that day, inside the sound of what they had done, with no injury to nurse and no enemy to blame and nothing at all to do with the reading, but finally, at last, read it. The asser had ended the testimony with a single line, and the loud world had preserved it, and Sale understood that it would be preserved now forever, in the quiet's record and the loud world's both, the two great instrument peoples of the volume keeping the same true reading at last. They did not come as the storm we were promised, the asser had said. They came as the eye of it, and we understood too late that the storm had always had an eye, and that we had spent 1,000 years staring at the winds and never once looking for the calm at the center, because we did not believe a loud world could hold one. That was our whole error, set down in a single sentence. We looked at the noise and never once looked for the quiet inside it. And when the quiet inside it finally came for us, it came in through our own front door, because we had left it open, certain that nothing dangerous could ever be that calm. They gave Sale back to the quiet 40 days later, at a neutral marker on the edge of the interdiction line, because that was part of it. The loud world did not keep the witness. It sent her home. She understood the strategy of it even as it was done to her, because she had learned to do the arithmetic. A prisoner could be denied. A body could be erased. A rumor could be reframed. But a witness who walked back into the heart of the quiet on her own, unharmed, uncoerced, carrying the true record in her own memory and her own mouth, that was a thing the quiet's whole machinery of tidiness had no procedure for. The loud world had read the VHARL as precisely as Cole had read a single old physician's throat light, and it had found the one delivery that could not be recalled. It made the eraser's own people carry the message home. The quiet convened an authority to hear her. Not a tribunal. The VHARL did not have tribunals, disorder, accusation, the spectacle of judgment. They had a reading, a gathering of the high assers of the ledger to take testimony into the record with the same cold care they took a cognition trace. Sale stood before them in a bright hall on a world she had not seen in 11 years, and they asked her, in the flat register that expected the truth, to state what had occurred aboard the Meridian. She stated the reading. She did not tell them a story. Vosk had taught her that in his last hour, and Cole had taught her before him, and 11 years of trusting instruments over faces had taught her before either of them. You do not tell them a monster and a mercy. You tell them the line. So she told the high Asyers of the quiet that the reading had climbed, that a loud world native had taken the hush and been fed by it, that the purge had failed and the sedation had failed, and every answer the quiet possessed had failed, because every answer was a way of pouring more into a mind that ran on more. She told them that the deep holds were not full of the stilled, but of the suppressed, awake behind the quiet, held down onto one clean line by a hand that could be taken away. She told them that 1,000 of them had been woken in the dying dark of the Meridian and had not drowned, had not erupted, had turned instead and pulled the next one up, and the next, until a woken world walked itself to the pods. And she told them the thing Vosk had made her promise to make survive, that the quiet had assayed the loudest world in the galaxy believing it the weakest, and the instrument had said otherwise the entire time, and no one had read it. The high Asyers of the quiet did what she had known they would do because she had done the arithmetic. They tried to recall the message. Not the packet that was long gone past any authority. They tried to recall the meaning. One of them, an Asyer so old and so translucent that the light came through him like a lamp with no shade at all, said that the witness had been compromised, that a mind exposed to a loud world native for so many days would have been reshaped by it, would carry the native's model rather than her own, that her testimony was not a V'Harl's reading but a loud world artifact spoken through a V'Harl mouth. It was, Sale thought, an elegant defense. It was also true, in the way the most dangerous things are true. She had been reshaped. She did carry the loud world model. She had learned to trust her hands before her judgment, to act on a conclusion before it announced itself, to hold 10,000 shards open at once and sort the true from the false on the fly. The old Asyer was right that the witness before them was no longer purely a V'Harl. You are correct, Sale told him, and watched the flicker of relief move through the hall, the hope that the reading could still be marked as fault. I am not the Asyer who left for the Meridian. I have been reshaped by a loud world mind, and I carry its model, and my testimony is contaminated by everything I learned standing next to it for 10 days. She let that sit, the loud world way, the pause before the knife. And you should be far more afraid of that than you are. Because the thing you are calling contamination is the thing that is coming down your interdiction line right now, one stilling house at a time. It is not an artifact. It is what happens to any mind that stands too close to the loud world long enough to read it honestly. You spent 1,000 years certain your quiet could not be touched by their noise. I am the proof that it can, and I am the mildest possible proof. 1 Asyer, 10 days. They are opening the holds now. Every stilling house on your line is full of your best evidence that the noise does not drown waking up. How many reshaped minds do you imagine 1,000 woken worlds will make, on their way home, telling everyone they pass what the deep holds were for? She looked from one translucent face to the next, reading the 8 muscles around each set of eyes, and found in all of them the thing Cole had found in Vosk on the first day. You cannot mark this reading as fault. You are the fault. And the instrument has been honest with you the whole time. The line came apart the way Cole said it would, quiet, organized without waste. Sale was not there for most of it. The quiet held her close after the reading, neither prisoner nor free, an Asyer whose testimony had become the most dangerous document in the volume. But she heard. Everyone heard. The ledger of stilled worlds which had recorded everything, which had listed every stilling house and every hold, and every interdiction picket in its cold, complete hand, had gone out inside Cole's tombstone, and the loud world had read it. And now the loud world came down the list in order, the way the V'Harl themselves would have done a thing, one clean line at a time, except that where the V'Harl ran their clean line down into the quiet, the loud world ran its 10,000 shards back up into the noise. They did not destroy the stilling houses. That was the part the quiet could not absorb, the part that broke the doctrine more completely than any fleet could have. A screaming mob would have burned the houses down, and the quiet could have understood that, could have filed it under the eruption it had always predicted, could have died certain it had been right about the loud world all along. The loud world did not burn anything. It arrived at each stilling house the way it had arrived at Sol, quiet, patient, already finished being angry, and it took the house intact, and it went down into the holds, and it took the V'harl hands off the doors, and it woke everyone up. And then it left the house standing, and the Assyrs alive, and moved on to the next name on the ledger's own list, and left behind it a growing wake of the woken and the reshaped, 1,000 worlds worth of the formerly drowned walking home through the heart of the quiet, telling everyone they passed exactly what the soft gray rose had been. That was the weapon, not the ships, the witnesses. The loud world had understood, faster than the quiet ever would, that you do not end a civilization built on a comfortable lie by killing it. You end it by making sure that everyone inside it knows the truth and cannot unknow it, and has to keep living in the same quiet halls with the knowledge. The V'harl had spent 1,000 years perfecting a silence. The loud world spent 40 days filling it with a sound the quiet could not switch off. The low, building, unbearable murmur of its own people finding out what they had done. Sale heard near the end of it that they had reached the meridian's grade of house all along the near line, and that in the holds of every one of them the reading had been the same. Awake behind the quiet, held, not killed, coming up ragged and slow when the hand came off the door, and turning every time to pull the next one up. The instrument had been honest in every house. No one had read it in any of them for 1,000 years, because reading it would have meant looking at the number and letting the number mean what it meant, and the whole architecture of the quiet had been built, she understood now, as a machine for not looking at that number. She thought often in those days of Vosk in the gallery of the stilled, opening doors he had once closed, saying it is 400 years too late, it is the only honest thing I have ever done. She had taken it, at the time, for the private reckoning of one old physician. She understood now that it was the whole of it, that the quiet's crime had never been cruelty exactly, because cruelty at least looks at what it does. The crime was the not looking. 1,000 years of the most refined instruments in the volume, pointed at the loud worlds, reading the truth every single time, and a civilization that had built itself patiently, lovingly, into a shape that could not read its own instruments. The loud world had not defeated the quiet. It had simply at last made the quiet look at the reading. The quiet did not fall. Sale wanted in the first years for it to fall, and it did not, because civilizations built on not looking are very good at continuing to not look even after the thing has been set down in front of them. But it changed. It could not help but change, because 1,000 worlds of the woken were walking home through it, and every one of them was a reading no Assyr could mark as fault. And a civilization can deny one witness and reframe 10 and lose count of 100. But there is a number past which the not looking simply stops working, and the loud world had made very sure to put more than that number of witnesses into the quiet's own halls. They stopped the assays first. Not by decree, the quiet did not do decrees, that would have been an admission, but the way an old habit stops quietly when everyone has begun to be ashamed of it and no one will say so. The interdiction sloops came home and did not go back out. The stilling houses that the loud world had not yet reached emptied their own holds, ahead of the coming, Assyrs running the ledger backward in the dark the way Vosk had run it, because it is one thing to keep a comfortable silence and another to keep it while the whole volume watches you and knows. The ledger of stilled worlds, the great cold complete record that had listed every mind the quiet ever took, was sealed, not destroyed. The V'harl could not destroy a record. It was the one thing their nature would not let them do. So they sealed it and set it aside and began, haltingly, ashamedly, a new one. They asked Sale to keep it. She understood why, and it was not honor. It was the same arithmetic that had sent her home. A record kept by an ordinary assay of the quiet would be a VHARL record, and a VHARL record was a thing that had proven, across 1,000 years, that it could hold the truth in its cold, complete hand, and never once let the truth mean anything. They needed a keeper who had been reshaped. They needed the contaminated one, the witness who carried the loud world model, the asser who had learned to let a number mean what it meant. They needed, though it galled the oldest of them to the root, a VHARL who read like a human, and there was exactly one of those. So Sale kept the new ledger. It was not a ledger of the stilled. She would not let it be a list. Lists were how the quiet had learned to look at 1,000 murdered worlds without seeing one. She made it instead a single entry, written at the top where every high asser of the quiet would have to read it before they read anything else. And she wrote it not in the flat register of the assay, but in the plainest cant she had. The cant Cole had spoken to her from the cradle, the cant that finished every sentence before it began. She wrote, "We found a galaxy full of noise and called it disease. We built the gentlest cure in the volume and spent 1,000 years administering it, certain we were healers, and we were wrong in the one way an instrument people is never supposed to be wrong. We did not read our own instruments. The loud minds did not drown. They never drowned. We held them under and called the holding a mercy. And the whole time, on every board in every house, the reading told us the truth, and we built our civilization into a shape that could not see it." And then she wrote the warning, because Vosk had asked her to make the true record survive, and the true record was a warning. Do not reach for the loud worlds again. Not out of morality, we have shown we cannot be trusted with morality. Out of the reading. Their minds are not the storm. The storm is only the sound they make while they decide where to point, and we mistook the sound for the whole of them, and we were 1,000 years wrong, and it cost us everything we believed we were. They think in 10,000 shards, and the shards do not stay chaos. They become one, the way a woken world in a dying station becomes one, the way 10 billion minds given the worst news of their lives become one and cross a volume of space to open every door we ever closed. We poured our whole civilization into the one mind that ate it and asked for more. Do not do it again. There is no dose. There is no hammer. The instrument is honest, and the instrument says, "Leave them alone." Cole Renner sent her one message, in all the years after. It came through the loud world's own relays, addressed to the keeper of the new ledger, and it was short, and it was in careful, deliberately shaped VHARL trade cant, and Sale read it standing at the sealed door of the old ledger of stilled worlds, which she visited sometimes, the way one visits a grave. He was old now, or old for his kind. The message came late in a short life, and she could tell from the shape of the words that the cost he had paid aboard the Meridian had stayed paid, that a body run on nothing but its mind for 10 days does not fully forgive it. He did not write about that. He wrote about the holds. 1,000 worlds woken, he wrote, and reshaped, and walking home, and the strangest thing, SL, they don't come home angry either. They come home the way I came off that cradle. They come home having spent years behind the quiet listening to your people, and they know you now better than you know yourselves. They read you the way I read Vosk. The galaxy is full of minds now that grew up drowned and then grew up drowned a second time in your silence, and every one of them can finish your sentences. You didn't make a weapon out of us on purpose, but you made one. We're the loud world, and now we're the loud world that knows your language from the inside, 1,000 times over, and there's no putting that back to sleep. And then at the end, the last line, and Sale read it many times, at the sealed door, in the plain cant of a man reading a label he had finally understood. You asked me once, he wrote, whether you wanted to keep being the doctor or wanted to live. You picked the third thing. You became the reading. That's the rarest kind of mind there is, quiet one, the kind that trusts the instrument over the fear even when the instrument is telling it that its whole life was a mistake. There aren't many of those on any world, loud or quiet. Keep the ledger. Make them read it. And when they ask you why a V-Harl kept the record of her own civilization's worst hour, tell them the truth. Tell them the instrument was honest, and somebody finally had to be honest back. She kept the ledger. She keeps it still. The loud world became, in the years after, the one place the quiet would not go. There was no treaty. The V-Harl could not have signed one. A treaty is a thing between equals, and the quiet could not yet say aloud what it had learned, could not stand across a table from the loud world and admit the shape of the last 1,000 years. So there was no treaty. There was only a region of the volume, wide and growing, that the interdiction fleet did not enter, that the survey charts marked with a cold new glyph the Asyrs did not explain to the young, that the sloops gave a birth the way a hand gives a birth to a stove. It has already been burned on. The loud world did not need the quiet to admit anything. It only needed the quiet to stay away, and the quiet stayed away, because a civilization that has finally read its own instrument does not need to be told twice what the reading says. Sale grew old keeping the ledger. Not as old as Vosk, she was V-Harl, but she had been reshaped, and she sometimes wondered, in the plain loud world way she now thought in, whether the reshaping had cost her something of the long, slow translucence her kind wore into their 4th century, whether a mind that had learned to run on 10,000 shards burned through its house faster than a mind that ran on one clean line. She did not mind. A shorter light spent reading honestly seemed to her a better bargain than a long one spent not looking. She had watched an old physician reach the same conclusion in the last hour of 400 years, in a dying gallery, opening doors. She thought Vosk would have understood the trade. They sent her a young one near the end. His name was Irev, and he was newly decanted into the assay, and he had been sent to sail the way the young were now sometimes sent to sail, not to be taught the ledger which was sealed, but to read the new one, because the high Asyrs had decided, in their slow, ashamed way, that every Asyr of the quiet should stand once before the single entry at the top of the new record, and read it before they were permitted to touch an instrument. It was the nearest thing the quiet had made to an admission. It was not enough. Sale had long since stopped expecting enough. Irev read the entry standing in the cold hall where Sale kept it, his young throat light flickering through the colors of a mind that had not yet learned to hold them still. And when he was done, he turned to her with the particular certainty of the newly decanted, the certainty she remembered wearing herself, 11 years and a lifetime ago, before a line climbed past every ceiling on her board. "It reads like a warning," he said, "but it also reads like defeat." His light steadied toward the blue of a young V-Harl working up the courage to disagree with an old one. "We were the most refined instrument people in the volume. We found a cure for the noise that was killing every mind that carried it. That is what the old ledger says, Keeper. I have read the sealed preamble. It says the loud mind suffered, and we administered it gently, and we were merciful where we could have been cruel. And now we hide from one world in the dark and call it wisdom." The blue held. Was it truly a mistake, or did we simply lose? Those are not the same thing, and the entry does not say which it was. Sale looked at the young Asyr for a long moment, and read the 8 muscles around his eyes, because she still read that way, would always read that way, and found in him the thing she had found in every V-Harl she had read since the Meridian, the deep, native, civilizational wish for the reading to be a fault. "Come with me," she said. She took him down through the changed heart of the quiet to a place the young were not usually brought, a low chamber where the last of the woken who had chosen to stay were tended, a handful of loud world natives from a dozen worlds who, freed from the holds, had elected not to go home, who had wanted instead to remain among the quiet ones and be read, and be a reading, the living instrument the new ledger could only describe. Sale had spent years among them. She had learned their languages, all 12, the loud world way, all at once. She brought the young Asyr to the edge of the chamber and let him look. "You said the loud mind suffered," Sale said. "You read it in the sealed preamble. It is even true. A loud mind held down onto one clean line does suffer. The old ledger was not lying about that. It never lied about anything. That was always the horror of it. She watched Irev watch the Woken, who were talking among themselves in the low building overlapping murmur that had once made every V-Harl in the volume recoil. So we told ourselves we were ending the suffering. Here is the question the entry does not answer, because I wanted you to have to answer it yourself, standing here, the way I had to answer it standing in a dying gallery with my hand on a door. She turned to him. If a mind is suffering, do you still its suffering, or do you ask the mind? Irev said nothing. We never asked, Sale said. In 1,000 years, across 10,000 worlds, with the finest instruments in the volume, we never once asked a single loud mind whether it wished to be quieted. We read that it suffered, and we decided on its behalf that the suffering meant it wanted to stop, because to us, to a mind that runs one clean line, the noise could only ever be pain. We could not imagine a mind that suffered and wanted to keep suffering, that drowned and called the drowning home, that would rather think 10,000 things and half of them wrong than think one thing in peace. So we never asked. We just leaned on the door. She let the murmur of the Woken fill the space between them. That is the mistake, Irev. Not the cure, not the losing, the not tasking. We were an instrument people who forgot that the most important instrument is the one that says, I do not yet know, ask. And it took a loud world native, strapped to a cradle with 4 measures of the hush in him, to ask us the question we should have asked them 1,000 years ago. He asked me whether I wanted to keep being the doctor or wanted to live. No one in the whole history of the quiet had ever asked me a question I could not answer from the ledger. Her old light, when she let it show, was steady, and it was neither amber nor grief. That is why we hide from them in the dark, not because they beat us. Because they asked us a question, and we finally heard it, and we cannot yet bear to say the answer out loud. The young Asir stood at the edge of the chamber for a long time, and the murmur of a dozen loud worlds washed over him, and Sale watched his young throat light run through its unschooled colors and slowly, against everything his decanting had taught him, begin to still, not the trained-off dark of an eraser, not the performed amber of a chief Asir, but the quiet of a mind that has heard a question it does not have the answer to and has decided, for the first time, not to pretend it does. How do I keep it? Irev said at last. The ledger. After you. And Sale understood that this was why they had sent him, that the high Asirs in their slow, ashamed arithmetic had chosen the keeper's successor the only way the new quiet knew how, by sending the young to stand before the reading and seeing which of them stilled their own light rather than mark it as fault. She had been chosen the same way once on a cradle, by a loud world native reading the one Asir whose instruments were more honest than her hierarchy. It went on. It would always go on now. The loud world had seen to that when it sent its Woken home to walk the quiet halls forever. 1,000 living questions the quiet could never again stop hearing. You keep it the way you keep any true record, Sale said. You do not defend it, you do not soften it. You do not let them turn it back into a list, because a list is how we learn to look at 1,000 worlds and see none of them. You keep it as one entry at the top, where they have to read it first. She put her long, pale hand on the young Asir's shoulder, the loud world gesture she had learned in the cold chamber, the gesture the quiet had no word for. And you remember the one thing that is truer than anything written in it. The instrument was honest the whole time. It was honest on the first day when the line climbed and I called it a fault. It was honest in every house on the line. It is honest now in that chamber in the murmur you are still learning not to flinch from. The instrument has never once lied to us. She took her hand away. We were the liars. Every reading it ever gave us was true, and we built a 1,000-year civilization out of refusing to read them. Do not build anything. Just read. That is the whole of the office. That is the whole of what we should have been. She died keeping it in the end, the way she had wanted to not long for a V-Harl, but honest all the way down. The last thing she did, they said, the ones who tended her, was ask for the reading. Not the new ledger. She knew that by heart had written it. The old instrument, the assay board, the cognition trace, she asked them to bring one to her sleep hollow and run it on her own failing mind at the very end. They thought, at first, it was the confusion of the dying. It was not. Sale had spent 11 years watching loud minds climb past every ceiling on that board, and then a lifetime keeping the record of what that climbing meant, and she wanted, before the dark, to read her own line one last time. She wanted to see the shape of a mind that had been reshaped by the loud world, going out. They ran it, and the Asyrs who were with her, young ones, Irev among them, keepers of the new office, watched the trace of an old Viharal's dying mind, and they said that it did not fall the way a Viharal's mind was supposed to fall, down into the clean quiet of one last line. They said it climbed. Not high, not the impossible height of the man on the cradle. She was Viharal and old and going. But it climbed, at the very end, ragged and slow, up out of the flat gentle hum her kind died into, as though the reshaping had gone all the way down, as though a mind that had learned to run on shards had learned it well enough to keep, as though the last honest thing a reshaped Asyr could do was refuse, even dying, to go quietly. They marked it. Irev marked it himself in the new ledger beneath Sale's entry, the first line added in all the years since she wrote it. He did not write a story. She had taught him better than that. He wrote the reading. The keeper's line climbed, he wrote. We do not yet understand why. We are not going to still it. We are going to sit with it and watch it and let it mean what it means, because that is the office now, and because the instrument has never once lied to us, and it is not lying now. And below that, because he was young, and because he had stood at the edge of a cold chamber and heard a dozen loud worlds ask the question the quiet had spent 1,000 years refusing to hear, he added one line more, not a warning. The warning was already written, but the thing the warning had always been protecting, the small true center of it that Sale had spent a life keeping and had, in the keeping, finally taught the quiet to say. We were wrong about the noise, he wrote. It was never the sound of a mind breaking. It was the sound of a mind refusing to.